Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophy and Wilf, good morning from both of us. Lots of news today.
Two BBC bosses, Director General Tim Davey and the Chief Executive of News, Deborah Turness, quit over an impartiality scandal.
Donald Trump claims the credit welcoming their departures and saying a BBC Panorama programme was purposefully dishonest over an edit of his speech.
Ofsted launches new school report cards after pressure to end one-word assessments following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry.
We'll be hearing from the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who says the BBC bosses could have kept their jobs if they'd apologised immediately.
Plus, is Christian nationalism on the rise in the UK? We'll hear from the founder of the Oasis Trust, Reverend Steve Chalk.
Hello, good morning, and thanks for joining us today. So two BBC bosses have quit, the Director General, Tim Davey, and the Head of News, Deborah Turness. They both stepped down over an impartiality row. So Tim Davey's been in the job 5 years, and he has, it should be said, come under fire over a series of controversies.
But it was a Panorama documentary and accusations that it misled viewers by editing a speech from Donald Trump, so he appeared to explicitly encourage the Capitol Hill riots in January of 2021 that led to his ultimate demise. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has told Sky News the two could have kept their jobs if they'd dealt with the crisis at the time and apologised immediately.
Well, today the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, is also expected to apologise. Donald Trump has got involved as well. He's welcomed the move. He said that those involved were dishonest.
Well, we've got full team coverage, as always. Mari's here to discuss the political fallout with us, and Katie's at BBC HQ in central London. Let's go to Katie. First of all, Katie, the latest stage of it all unfolded late yesterday, and I think surprised a lot of people to see two quite such high-profile resignations.
Yeah, look, what a Monday morning for the corporation, which is now finding itself looking for two of the big major roles within the BBC. I've been here a number of times over the last couple of years for the Strictly scandal, the Greg Wallace episode, the Glastonbury saga that we had. Throughout that, Tim Davey has managed to ride out these various dramas where people consistently have said, why hasn't he resigned sooner? But it was this leaked memo that was published in the Telegraph last week that seems to have sealed his fate, if you like. The memo was by a former external advisor to the Editorial and Standards Committee at the BBC, highlighting this edit within the BBC Panorama episode about Donald Trump and how it had been spliced together, two sections of Donald Trump's speech on that day that preceded the Capitol riots, and pointing out how there'd been a 50-minute window in between these two separate sections that were sandwiched together. And I think for many people that was just too grave a mistake for the BBC to have made, and to have not, Tim Davey not to have sooner held his hands up last week and said, look, we made a mistake. He didn't. There was silence for many, many days until last night. I think the pressure had built to such a stage where he had little choice, really, but to resign. We've had various reactions from politicians around the world and in this country, including from the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown.
I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. And an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of news would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for. And I think that is where trust becomes an issue.
Katie, we'll stay with Katie, of course, and go back to her as well. But I just want to bring in Mari Aurora, our political correspondent at this point as well, because it feels like there's been a bit of a political dimension to this too, and people will have their own views on it as well. But of course, Donald Trump has been effectively kind of claiming credit for this as well, and his press secretary too, effectively telling people to not watch the BBC.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment, really, politically, where you've got the President of the United States basically celebrating the demise of the Director General and the head of BBC News, and then his press secretary, Caroline Levitt, basically saying, BBC News is dead, watch GB News. We know that GB News and the Trump administration have a relatively close relationship, and I think the difficulty is that, obviously, here in the UK, it's not quite the same press landscape that it is in America, and broadcasters and people like us have to be a bit more careful about impartiality in the way that it's slightly different in the US, and so it's not the same landscape, despite the fact that it might be suggestions of that.
Let's look at the Donald Trump tweet, shall we? It's not a tweet, I should say. He posted on Truth Social. He said the top people in the BBC, including Tim Davey, the boss, are all quitting or fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January the 6th. Thank you to The Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists. These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they're from a foreign country, one that many consider our #1 ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. I mean, he doesn't hold back, does he?
He doesn't hold back. And the difficulty now is how much can the BBC not just recover from this, but actually be seen to not be trying to weigh into a kind of politicised debate. So we know here in the UK, for instance, the majority of the voices that have been critical of this, but in general the BBC, are on the right. We've seen the celebrations of these resignations from the likes of Liz Truss, Suella Braverman, Nadine Dorries, those kind of figures that have often kind of gone to battle with the BBC in the past. And so far you've got the government trying to essentially straddle support for the BBC and also not upsetting the Trump administration. Of course, that's obviously going to play a part. And then you've got the Lib Dems, who are the only party really backing the BBC for now.
Well, I mean, I actually think you get a lot of people from the left criticise the BBC to say they put too much reform coverage on. And I think the BBC's always scrutinised more than anyone else because it is publicly funded. And you kind of have an impossible job. We all make mistakes. And nobody is perfectly impartial. I think the unbelievable error here is this was a year ago. Yeah. It's actually something that Gordon Brown really picked up on in our interview. We're going to play more of that a bit later. It was a year ago. It was flagged to people and they didn't respond, which makes it look like either you don't realise it was a mistake or you're trying to cover it up. We can't judge between those. I do just want to bring back Katie, because my question, I don't actually know the answer to this, is what comes next? So obviously we've got to get through the apologies and we'll hear from the chairman today, we expect on that. Who then picks the next leadership? Is it purely the choice of the chair, or is it the Sanandi, the culture secretary, get involved? I mean, there's a long way to go before they can really draw a line fully under everything.
Yes, and don't forget Tim Davey in his statement last night put out the fact that he isn't going to have disappeared from here overnight. It's going to be over the next few months that this decision is made. But it is also a political decision as well. The government does have involvement in who the next candidate is, which is why this is sort of such a tricky area to negotiate. The BBC, of course, wants to be impartial from government, but the government does have a say on who the next big boss would be. The other thing that I would just say, though, is there will be plenty of people inside of here today that are absolutely gutted by the fact that it is being interpreted by some people that this double resignation is almost a sort of admitting this accusation of bias within the BBC. I think a lot of people will find that in itself deeply disappointing, because accountability and trust is at the heart of what people who work for the BBC hold very dear to them.
Katie, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting to get your perspectives from outside the BBC. As you say, quite some return to work this week for the people working there as well. Thank you. Mara, good to have you as well, of course. I mean, it is a difficult political one as well, isn't it, I guess, for the government. As you say, they've been so careful, haven't they, to avoid upsetting Donald Trump. But actually, the BBC is it's a big part of our national identity as well, isn't it?
It is, and I think despite how people might feel about the BBC, it is synonymous with British life, British culture, right? And it's a public broadcaster. And I think the difficulty for the government is there is always an accusation that Labour is always going to favour the BBC over the Tories, and that's not actually necessarily quite as clear-cut as some might have it suggested. But I think the government is going to have to be very, very careful not to be seen to be trying to lead in any direction. And I think Lisa Nandy has tried as much as possible to play it relatively straight, to the point where she didn't seem to, on the morning round yesterday, even realise that Tim Davey was about to go, and I think that suggests that perhaps maybe she was slightly kept in the dark because she was asked directly several times on different channels about resignations.
Perhaps as shocked as the rest of us. Mari, thanks very much.
Now, we want to talk about schools. Parents in England are about to see a new kind of Ofsted report card brought in after changes to school inspections following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023.
So a coroner later ruled that the Ofsted inspection had contributed to her suicide. Then, of course, there was a kind of national outcry and calls for a more compassionate approach to school inspections.
Under the new system, inspectors will rate schools across key areas instead of giving a single grade. But some, including the Association of School and College Leaders, have criticised the new system for putting even more pressure on teachers. Anjem is here for us to break down the nuance in this, because I think most people would accept there needs to be some kind of review of schools. And these new report cards are more detailed, but they're still going to have a summary at the top. Is that fair?
So I think there's more detail available to parents, but I think the fundamental issue here is that the calls were made for change and reforms as a result of the tragic death of Ruth Perry and as a head teacher and a senior leader. And I think that issue hasn't really been resolved. If we're still seeing issues being raised by the Association of School and College Leaders, but also the National Association of Head Teachers have said that they're not happy. They've said that the new system is still unsafe, unfair and unsustainable. So we're looking at a sector who is not really in agreement with the new changes and the reforms and are saying that actually it's not a sustainable way of moving forward. And we know it's a sector that's really facing quite a lot of difficulty with regards to recruitment and retention. So it seems that Sir Martin Oliver and his team have listened to what parents have asked for, but that was never really the fundamental issue that, you know, where the change and where the instigation for change has come from. The sector, though, does not seem to have had the same buy-in. And that's the concern, I think, that we're facing today, where we see the launch and the new report card system coming into play.
First, I just want to say how I am in awe of teachers, right? Absolutely in awe of the work that they do in the circumstances that they do. But is there, I guess, a fundamental issue here between the teaching unions, who quite rightly want there to be less pressure on their members because that is their job, but parents who also, you know, rightly, is the most important decision they're going to make, what school their child goes to, and they're going to need some kind of way of comparing, of challenging, of testing schools, right?
Absolutely, and there should be a measure of accountability. I don't think that that needs to be removed in its entirety at all, but there are other ways of being able to judge schools. For example, schools already have so much information about the way that they operate online. Their websites are kind of flooded with policies and implementation and all of those things.
But it's very hard to compare those. Like, you know, one
Sure.
school might have a great website and another one might not have such a good website, but the second school might be better, or, you know, there's safeguarding, there's, you know, teaching process, and also, I guess, the website that's controlled by the school, who are always going to want to put their best foot forward, right?
Absolutely, but I think as a parent, there are so many other opportunities. You've got your open evenings, your open mornings, where you can actually go and see a school in action and get a real flavour for what is happening on a day-to-day basis at the schools.
You don't necessarily on a day-to-day basis, though, do you? Right? You know, you go in, you might get a tour from one kid, and you get the, you know, the head teacher telling you how great it is. I'm not sure you really go into.
I mean, I think it's
reality.
really important to speak to the children who were at the school and the alumni of the school and the staff and other parents at the school. I think that's a much better indication of or one word or two words judgment. I think there is more information available in the new Ofsted, but I think there needs to be a kind of a compromise with the sector as well, because I think it's going to have huge implications and repercussions for the sector, where if workload is unsustainable, we've already got this issue where, you know, teachers are leaving in droves, and I think that's really something that needs to be looked at in a lot more detail, and sort of long-term plan needs to be put into place for that.
Anjem, great stuff. Thanks so much. We'll be
really
talking more about it. Those new reports they're coming to effect today.
Today.
Now, Now, the US Senate has taken the first major steps towards ending America's longest ever government shutdown.
So it's now been 41 days since the shutdown began, but in the last few hours, a group of moderate Democrats agreed to support federal funding plans. Wilf, as someone who has, covered Westminster for a while, I find the idea of a 41-day government shutdown slightly mind-blowing.
Yeah, so we should clarify as well what a shutdown is when they don't agree, Congress and the President, on specific funding plans. And yes, President Trump has a majority in both houses of Congress, but in the Senate, some of these bills require a supermajority, 60 votes. He doesn't have that. He's got a majority. And essentially, then both sides stand off with each other and say, we'll allow a shutdown to happen unless you also give me this or you give me that. And this has been the longest in history, 41 days, which is striking. But I think it also shows that for most people, things have continued as normal. So it's not, the term shutdown, I think, makes it sound worse than it is.
This is the thing. What actually happens when there is a shutdown? Because it's not like everything just stops, right?
Federal employees in most areas haven't been paid for now 41 days. Now, they will get that payment. It'll be backdated when it comes through. And clearly, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, that is unacceptable.
And a federal employee is like, what kind of thing?
It can be anything from a federal agency that looks after a park to some interesting jobs in aviation, which I'll come to in a second. The sort of question mark for why suddenly, and by the way, we haven't ended it yet, but why suddenly do we start to see the two sides put aside their differences to get something done, I think is two big reasons. One is that some federal programs, like food payments to the poorest, are starting to run out of money. They need to be topped up again, and clearly people don't want to get to a situation where people really can't eat. Also, we've seen a big backlog starting to build up in terms of flight delays. And this is that classic example where the politicians have to come together and get past their differences when it really starts to hurt them with the voters. We're coming up to Thanksgiving. It's the busiest travel weekend of the year. And it's clearly got to a point where both sides have to say, OK, let's just get on and do this. But a shutdown is sometimes confused with a default, i.e. they failed to pay their national debts, to pay interest on their bonds. That's absolutely not what it is. And, stock market's at a record high even after 41 days of a shutdown.
Interesting stuff. Thanks, Will. Now to the Philippines, where the super typhoon Fangwong has made landfall, which basically means it's hit land, if that makes sense. It brings winds of up to 143 miles per hour, torrential rain, and also some pretty dangerous storms as well. At
least 2 people have been killed and more than 1 million people were forced to evacuate their homes. The country's already dealing with the destruction of Typhoon Kalmegi, which left more than 222 people dead when it hit a few days ago. The president's declared a state of emergency.
You can see there the kind of 1 million people evacuated as that typhoon hits the Philippines. And of course, we'll be hoping for that death toll not to rise any further.
Now, have you seen this from Ed Sheeran? We've been talking about education today. We've been talking about education last week as well, with changes to the curriculum. And there include proposed changes to the music curriculum, the scrapping of what he said was outdated systems that stop children studying music. And he's embraced that.
Yes, so one of the big changes is to get rid of what's known as the English Baccalaureate, the EBAC. So that was introduced by the former Conservative Education Secretary, Michael Gove. It effectively means you have to get points across lots of different subjects. And what they said was the EBAC had limited access to and time available for art subjects. So that was the concern here.
Yeah, and good to see someone like that's campaigned in this area, embrace these changes that come through. And obviously, at the moment, proposed changes, but we'll see if they all come.
Yeah, all comes down to money, doesn't it, with these things? This is the thing. Music lessons, stuff like that cost money. Art budgets have been slashed. I'll be interested to see the details of that. Now, of course, our main story today is the crisis, I think that's fair to say, at the top of the BBC, and the government, of course, trying to tread that very difficult line between being supportive of the BBC and the national institution that many believe that is, but also, of course, they care very much about the relationship with Donald Trump, I think it's fair to say, who has praised the departure of people he describes as dishonest. Lots to talk about, including, of course, the veterans policy with the Minister for Veterans and People, Louise Sanders-Jones. Great to have you on the programme today. Louise, I'm very keen, of course, to talk to the important work the government's doing on veterans in particular. But first, if I can, just to what's happened with the BBC, a big breaking news story today. The BBC Director General and the Head of News have both quit after criticism for several editorial decisions. Were they right to go?
So as the Culture Secretary has said, we do thank Tim Davey and Deborah Turness for their service. They've been at the BBC through a period of significant challenge. But as a whole, the BBC is an absolutely iconic institution in the United Kingdom. Every day it puts out a huge range of output. I know it's hugely trusted by many people, whether they're using its broadcast news, its radio services, its local news. And on the whole, I think it's a very respected institution. And indeed, I think it was at its best over the weekend, covering the remembrance events, whether it was at the Cenotaph or the additional programming like the Festival of Remembrance.
It's interesting you say there about, you kind of believe that the BBC gets a lot of things right, which I'm sure a lot of people would agree with. But I guess what this report lays bare is that they have got some things wrong as well. Editing the Trump speech, there's been questions about his coverage of trans issues, also the war in the Middle East. Deborah Turness said in her resignation letter that while mistakes have been made, I want to be absolutely clear that recent allegations BBC News is institutionally biased are wrong. I just want to be crystal clear. Do you think that BBC News is institutionally biased?
I think one thing I found really interesting as a constituency MP is I meet such a broad range of people who have such a broad range of views. I can be speaking to two people in quick succession who have diametrically opposed views on a certain topic. And it's absolutely fundamentally important that the BBC, as our national broadcaster, represents the full spectrum of those views. I think that is quite a challenging thing to do, but nonetheless, it's an incredibly important duty, which I know it seeks to uphold across all of its wide range of programming.
So do you think it does? I guess that's my question. You say there that it's important for the BBC to reflect the views of the country, including your constituents. Do you think it does, or is it institutionally biased?
I think on the whole it does. When you look at just the huge range of domestic issues, local issues, international issues that it has to cover, I think its output is very trusted. And again, when I'm speaking to people who've got very strongly held views on those, they're still using the BBC for a lot of their information, that's forming their views on this. I think we can all point to elements of BBC broadcasting, of news, and say, well, that reflects my views and that doesn't. And that's absolutely right that we should be able to say that.
Donald Trump's posted on Truth Social. He's, I guess, kind of taking credit, really, for the resignations. And then his press secretary tweeted to say the BBC is dying because they're anti-Trump fake news and everyone should watch GB News. I mean, some people might think this is kind of foreign interference. I mean, does it look like Donald Trump can decide who's the head of the BBC?
So President Trump will obviously speak for himself. Tim Davey and Deborah Turness have been quite clear that it's their decision that they've stepped down. And I note that the board has thanked them for their service and had said that it had supported them. But they've, as they've said, taken accountability for what the BBC has put out. I think it is very important that public figures have accountability for sure. But I just want to reflect back, the BBC is a very trusted organisation. It's iconic in the United Kingdom. Again, just to refer back, just to see their coverage over remembrance events over the weekend, nobody does it better than the BBC.
OK, you're here to make an announcement about veterans. What is it that the government's doing?
So today we're launching our veterans strategy, and this is a hugely important milestone for us and a hugely proud moment for me as a veteran myself. The veterans strategy is going to be centred on 3 different themes. So what is really important that we recognise and celebrate the service of our armed forces, recognise the full breadth of people that serve in our armed forces today. It's about recognising as well that, for myself, I'm better off for having served, and the majority of people that serve in our armed forces are better off for doing so. It's recognising the skills, the experience, the values that they take with them into civilian life after having served, and the fantastic contribution that they can make. And of course, support, which is the 3rd pillar. There will always be those that do need extra support, extra help. It's about making sure that we're doing our duty by those who have served. And as part of this, we are opening the first round of applications as part of our Valor programme, which is to support a network of regional hubs. And this is so important because I hear all the time from veterans how it can be a bit confusing about where to go to access support. So Valor will have a network of physical hubs, physical locations where any veteran will be able to go and be able to get help and advice, whether it's help in seeking support for mental health, for employment, for housing. They'll be able to go, have a cup of tea and find out where it is that they need to go to get the support that they need.
Yeah, sounds like some really important work to be done with, people who've obviously served the country. You were in the army yourself, which you've spoken about. You're the MP for North East Derbyshire as well, and like many other MPs, you've seen St George's crosses appearing in your constituency. And I was just really struck by some words that you said back in August. You talked, quite expansively about flying the flag and how important it was to you, being in the army, and also, of course, in your life more generally. And then you said, if you think you can use our flags to divide us, it won't work. So I just wondered if you could explain a bit more what you meant by that. Do you think that people are flying the flag to divide us?
So, as somebody who served in the armed forces, I wore the flag on my arm virtually every day whilst I was serving. I'm hugely proud to be British. I'm hugely proud to be English. As you can see, I've got British flags right next to me today. I think this country is a fantastic country. I'm so proud of it. What I find frustrating is those that want to cause and sow division, that want to turn communities against each other, that want to say, oh, your problems here are caused by your neighbour, when I just think that's absolutely not true. And for me, the flag is for everybody in this country.
Do you think people are doing that by flying the flag?
I think there are some people out there for sure, and they're very open on social media for sure, about that they don't believe that the flag is everybody. They say the British flag is not for everybody in this country, very open about it. I completely disagree with that. When I see the British flag flying, I'm very proud, and I think it does speak to everybody.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sky News today.
Thank you.
Now, if you've got to head out and you can't watch the rest of the show live, make sure to check out our Cheat Sheet podcast. We record it early. Do the work so you don't have to. Here's a taste from today. This came to light in a meeting in May this year to Tim Davey and to Deborah Turness, and nothing has happened about it since. It could have been quite a small issue. It could have been a significant slap on the wrist for the editor in question of the programme. But when it comes to light, via a report, by the way, that, as you said, was an internal BBC ethics reviewer, not some BBC critic, and that nothing had happened for 6 months, I think that's where it causes problems for those in charge. That said, I was surprised that both left. Hugely high-profile step, and be really interesting to see who they approach to replace them.
So you can watch Cheat Sheet and listen to it. You can scan the QR code on your screen now to check out the Cheat Sheet podcast in full. 10 minutes, we rattle through it, we really do.
We do. We love doing it. But don't turn off the TV show.
Yeah, that's true.
Do both, if you can. Right, we're going to take a very quick break. We've got lots more still to come. We've got that big interview with Gordon Brown. That's coming up next hour. But more on the BBC next. We'll be talking to a number of experts, including the former head of ITN. We'll be right back.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, DC.
Hello, welcome back to Ridge & Frost. Lots of news for you this morning.
The former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's told Sky News that Tim Davey and Deborah Turness could have kept their jobs if the BBC had dealt with accusations about their Panorama documentary when they first arose a year ago. The pair resigned yesterday following claims the BBC had misled viewers by editing a speech from Donald Trump, so he appeared to explicitly encourage the Capitol Hill riots in January 2021.
Well, the US president has welcomed the resignations. He described it as a terrible thing for democracy. In a Truth Social post, Mr. Trump said that Tim Davey and Deborah Turness were very dishonest people and accused them of trying to step on the scales of a presidential election.
Schools will now be graded across a range of topics during Ofsted visits after changes were put in place following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023. Instead of a single grade, schools will now receive detailed report cards that assess quality of education, behaviour, leadership and personal development.
The US Senate has taken its first big step to ending the longest ever shutdown of the American government. It's gone into 41 days now, so a group of Democrats have agreed to support plans to extend federal funding that's disrupted air travel.
So our top story this morning, a double resignation of bosses at the BBC. Director General Tim Davey and Head of News Deborah Turness have both stepped down after an impartiality row, which really started to snowball from the start of last week and pick up pace. I don't think people expected this level of high-profile resignation. Certainly not both.
I think where this has come from is a report that was done by an individual who was a former editor of the political editor of the Sunday Times, who has come in and he has basically pinpointed a whole load of issues that he doesn't think the BBC has been duly impartial on. So that's things like trans rights, things like editing this Trump speech in particular to make it look like he was directly encouraging violence at the Capitol Hill riots. There's issues on the Middle East as well. And as a result of this, the two top dogs, if you like, have stepped down.
I think the important things that stand out for me on this is that this report was done by Michael Prescott, as you said, a former Sunday Times journalist, but he was internal to the BBC. This wasn't a report by an outsider. This was an internal BBC report. He was doing it on behalf of an internal ethics impartiality committee. And this report reached the bosses and was discussed in a meeting in May this year, in particular pointing to this issue that Donald Trump has understandably got upset about a Panorama package that aired a week before the election last year, referring to the Capitol Hill riots in 2021, that was misleading. And I think the reason you get to this point of these two resignations is that very fact. An internal report, not some spun outsider report, reached the bosses. They read it, discussed it, and decided not to take action circa six months ago. And however big the original issue was, and some BBC journalists are understandably pointing to the fact that there weren't complaints when that programme went out originally, but however big that original error was, if you know about it and you don't do anything about it, it looks like you're trying to cover it up, or that you just don't even realise it was a mistake in the first place.
I just want to bring you a little bit for what some BBC journalists are saying as well. John Simpson, of course, has been very critical of this. He effectively thinks it's a campaign to try and clip the wings of the BBC. We've also just had a new post from Nick Robinson, who, of course, is a Today programme presenter, who said, what's happened, what is happening at the BBC? And he's saying this is not normal times. He's clearly, concerned about it as well. It's interesting.
And what he really points to in that post is that, in fact, in our Gordon Brown interview, he says if something was done 6 months ago or a year ago, wouldn't have led to resignations. What Nick Robinson is saying is something was done last Monday or even last Tuesday, it might not have built up in this vacuum over the last week, which I can also understand. I think that made it worse than it needed to be. Whether or not that would have solved the issue or not, I don't know. I think it's interesting. We should also say is, we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfectly impartial. Maybe we shouldn't say this on Sky News, but I love the BBC and I wish them well. It's full of absolutely fantastic journalists.
Yeah, me too.
But I do think that the central point here is not how big an error it was initially, or more broadly, the great journalists that make up the company. The boss has got an internal memo that said this was wrong and did nothing about it for 6 months. That's really what has led to the resignations. I don't think it's anyone trying to sensationalise the scale of the initial error or not.
Let's talk now about Christian nationalism. So it's on the agenda off the back of the Unite the Kingdom rally in September, led by Tommy Robinson. Religious iconography was dotted throughout the demonstration, including crucifixes in the crowd, and they recited the Lord's Prayer on stage.
Our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire's been looking into this, and he spoke to Kieran Diwar, who advocates what he calls muscular Christianity and has been described by some as far-right. He rejects that label. Let's have a little taster of Tom's report before he joins us to discuss it.
One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. The Lord be with you.
Bishop Kieran Diwar rejects the Church of England as heretics. Instead, he gathers his flock on a beach in Cornwall.
Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
They answered the call he made on social media. He is preparing for a mass baptism.
In the Lord Jesus Christ, I gladly baptize you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Yes!
Yes!
Critics called Diwar the far-right bishop, a label he rejects. But he represents a new type of Christianity, more militant, more political, one I've come here to understand. Several of those here came because they saw Diwar speaking at Tommy Robinson's Unite the Kingdom rally. And they are ready to follow him into the cold waters of the Celtic Sea.
Well, Tom joins us now, and you can watch more of his reporting. Well worth doing so if you scan the QR code on the screen. Can you just clarify some terms? Maybe I should have known this. What is Christian nationalism?
Yeah, it's a term that more applies to the US, where we've seen it, where they have a tradition of really public, political Christianity. But basically, nationalist plus Christian. The idea being that people use a Christian identity to exclude others. We do have some sort of history of that in the UK, especially in Northern Ireland, as Christianity is a means of identity. But it feels like it's something new. We've been going to Tommy Robinson rallies, the anti-Islam activist, for a while now, and really struck by the one here in Westminster in September, how many crosses we saw, the Lord's Prayer being said. It was really front and centre, and that felt like a new thing.
I guess the question then I would have central to that is, how can we know what people's motivations are to carry a cross or to say the Lord's Prayer? You can observe, I guess, the types of places as you have where you're seeing it, but how do we know what people's motivations are?
I mean, very, very difficult to look into someone's soul. And, going to that beach in Cornwall, I think those motivations are real. But I think we can look at the effect and sort of the othering it has on other people. So what is the effect when people are saying, we're British, we're Christian? If you're not Christian, does that make you non-British? And I think that is the effect of a lot of this. So I'm not suggesting this is a cynical attempt. There is money involved. There is an influence from American social media. But that bishop, others we spoke to, they are committed Christians, even if they stand outside the faith, even if a lot of other Christians would disagree with their version of Christianity, especially in its message towards Islam and towards immigration. But it's the effect of that taken all together. And what does it mean when you see people marching through a street with across 150,000 people? Does that make you feel welcome if you're not a Christian? What does it mean if they want to have more legal powers for Christianity? You speak to these people who mean, well, gay marriage wouldn't be a thing, abortion rights would be restricted. Is that something we want? That's the position of a lot of these people. So those are all in the mix. And it feels, this is fringe Christianity. Most people still belong to the Church of England. It's the majority of Christians in this country. There's growing Christianity amongst young people, and that's not to say it's with this sort of extreme right Christianity. But I think these questions are there in a way that they haven't been before. We've seen it in the US, and it feels like this is a new thing here in the UK.
I just want to bring in our guest as well to discuss this a bit more, the Reverend Canon Steve Chalk from Southwark Cathedral. He's founder of the Oasis Trust, also here. Firstly, the Oasis Trust is, I should say, this extraordinary chain of schools that has done an awful lot for children in deprived backgrounds as well. What's your reaction to what Tom's been saying here? Because you signed a letter, didn't you?
Yes, I was one of 3 people who authored the letter, and then a whole group of Christian leaders across the board, different denominations, signed it. Because what we wanted to say is that, well, Jesus is the Prince of Peace. We're just coming up to Christmas, aren't we? And everybody talks about peace, the Prince of Peace. And you can't take the Prince of Peace and the sign of self-sacrifice, the cross, and co-opt it into something that's divisive, something that fragments, something that polarizes, something that makes people fearful because of their race or their religion, their creed or their sexuality. And you've got to remember, at the heart of all of this stands Jesus, who wasn't British.
So I guess it's interesting, isn't it? Because we were talking there about people who have like kind of a muscular Christianity. Do you feel that people that share this faith of you about this kind of inclusivity of the Christian religion need to be a bit muscular in expressing that as well, if that makes sense?
I think in one sense, we're all warriors for love and inclusion. We get the society that we all vote for every single day of our lives. And if we vote for division, we get division. And you see the seeds of that in our society all the time, which is why I think this issue is so important to us. It's not peripheral. Christianity gets co-opted, but there's a growing level of polarisation and fragmentation in our society, and we need to work to bring people together, because without that, all our children and our grandchildren are going to struggle.
We certainly do, and I'm really fascinated in this moment because you sort of made the point there that, of course, Jesus wasn't British, which I would say is, obviously that's the case. I don't think anyone would argue against that. That's kind of my question, and maybe I've missed this entirely as a thing or a movement in this country, but are people saying that Jesus was British and that only Brits can be Christian? And I haven't, again, I'm not trying to be ridiculous here, but wouldn't you need to know what people are thinking when they're walking to hold the cross to say that? I mean, I'm Christian, I like Britain and would potentially have both things in my house, but I don't think it's a huge leap to put them, to say those people think that.
No, well, I think a lot of people involved in Tommy Robinson's march, for instance, weren't far right. They're just people who feel poor and shut out. We work with them all the time. Dispossessed, not listened to, not heard, their wages are sinking, etc., etc. But when I'm in trouble, what I do is I look for someone else to blame for my situation, and that creates the divisiveness. When I said that Jesus wasn't British, what I was actually saying, of course, is that Jesus, well, one of his most famous stories is the story of the Good Samaritan, which I'm sure you know. Jesus was a Jew. Jews hated Samaritans, and Jesus tells this Jewish audience about someone who's a great role model for being human, who's not like them. Jesus' whole mission was about bringing people together across divides. And so any form of Christianity that ends up promoting the opposite is fake.
Just finally, Tom, because you spoke to the self-labelled bishop in this piece. I've forgotten his name. Remind me. Kieran Dura. What jumped out to you from what he told you?
I think it's that combination of he would say, to sort of the established church that it's been too inclusive. It's been focused on sort of repeating liberal pieties around immigration, around all sorts of things, when actually what the church should be doing is looking after its flock here in the UK. So that's where it comes from. But it is also specifically a rejection of Islam. Other people we spoke to saying, you know, perhaps Islam doesn't have a place in the UK, doesn't have a place in Europe. That's what we heard on stage at the Unite the Kingdom rally, and that's what some of the people we spoke to. And there's a difference between sort of standing up again for Christianity and British identity. And, you know, Britain is a Christian country. The majority religion is Christian. That is part of British identity. The point is, if you go really further down this, and we have seen this in America when it comes to sort of personal freedoms as well, around abortion, around sort of LGBT rights as well, how much does that religion intrude in other people's personal life? And I think that's what's at stake here. There's tradition, there's faith. I think they want to go beyond this and have more of an impact on political life.
Tom and Steve, thank you both very much. Much appreciated.
Coming up, we're going to be talking again about the BBC. We'll be speaking to the former Ofcom partner and ITN Chief Executive, Stuart Purvis, who I'm sure has got some interesting views on this.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Over the next 45 days, an estimated 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna. Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. We take you to the heart of the story in the largest democracy in the world.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
The data and forensics team is a multi-skilled unit dedicated to providing transparency in journalism. We followed a social media trail that led us to Bristol, where a confrontation between protesters erupted into a full-scale riot.
Here it really is pitched battle skirmishes, hurling missiles, throwing punches.
We gather, analyse and visualise data to tell data-driven stories. Sky News has been given exclusive data. Sky News has seen 72,000 posts used in this way. Elon Musk says it is, quote, a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America.
I think we would generally be called far right, sure.
It's called Return to the Land, and they invited me in. Its founder says he is building a fortress for the white race.
I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The chair of the BBC is expected to apologise to MPs today after the resignation of BBC Director General Tim Davey and BBC News Chief Executive Deborah Turness. The bosses stepped down following concern over the way a speech by Donald Trump was edited in an episode of Panorama.
So their departure has been welcomed by the US president and also, I should say, by his communications chief as well. They described the BBC as dishonest.
Let's talk to Stuart Purvis, the former ITN chief executive and former Ofcom partner for content and standards. Stuart, thanks so much for joining on this. Morning. Quick first question. Throughout the yesterday afternoon, did you expect these resignations?
I didn't expect them to come quite as quickly as they did, but I think the crunch point is this statement this morning. Basically, what we now know from actually sources inside the BBC, there's been this massive row going on inside the BBC about what the BBC should do. Should it apologise this morning? And what I think happened is basically there were so many rows going on inside the BBC board with particularly the news management, that they couldn't agree this statement. That's why we've waited a week for this statement.
We're just having a slight microphone issue, I should say, just to explain what's going on. So we're just speedily trying to sort that out.
Which it's funny, actually, what Stuart was saying there, because he was pointing to the sort of arguments over the last week as opposed to the issues that have unfolded over the last year. It's an issue that we were talking about moments ago, that Nick Robinson, the Today Show presenter, was tweeting about. And I guess, Stuart, to bring it back to this, are you implying the resignations are only really because of poor comms handling in the last 7 days? And had they handled the last 7 days perfectly, they wouldn't be warranted? Or would have they been warranted from the issues that this report points to?
Right, fair point. I think what we're beginning to understand is that in the argument this week about how to apologise or what to apologise about, we've got two completely different views. One is of the BBC management, particularly the news management, and one of the BBC board. And they couldn't agree. And in that process, I think Deborah Turness, the head of BBC News, realised that she no longer had the support of the board. And I suspect Tim Davey thought, well, actually, this isn't a moment for me to get out as well. I've had enough of this, etc., etc. So it may be these are deep, deep issues which are completely unresolved about life inside the BBC. And it came to a head on this statement. And today we're going to see what the statement says. And I have to say, the chairman of the BBC said yesterday that yesterday was a difficult day for the BBC. I think today is going to be a difficult day for the chairman of the BBC.
And so you're talking about Samir Shah, who's obviously not resigned. The two that have resigned are Tim Davey and Deborah Turness. Why do you think it will be so difficult for Samir Shah, the chair?
Well, Samir got the job because he was, like many of us, a broadcast journalist. And everyone said, well, Samir knows about these things, it's all going to be fine. He set up a process which was meant to be part of the solution. It's turned out to be part of the problem. It's a committee where there is one board member who has a particular point of view, and he expresses that view very firmly to the management. They don't always agree with him. There's then a subcommittee where a number of people who don't agree with the management express their views. Now, at that point, the chair's job is to manage that process. That's what chairs do. They don't do much else sometimes other than resolve tensions and issues within boards and committees. That's what I've done for about the last 20 years. And the fact is he has not managed this process to a satisfactory conclusion.
So do you think he's going to ultimately go as well? I mean, this is crucial because he appoints the next Director General and perhaps even more importantly will be central in the negotiations with the government about the next BBC Charter.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting he should go. I'm not suggesting, he should resign. But I have to say he has to take his share of responsibility.
And what are you looking for today in this statement? How far do you think it should go, will go?
I'm just intrigued as to what exactly the BBC is going to apologise for. I go back to the days of the Hutton Report, the famous weapons of mass destruction row, where the BBC apologised for things they hadn't even done, just to try and end it all, if you like. So the political pressure is sometimes, let's get it all, let's draw a line. I don't think you can draw a line on the deep issues there are within the BBC about these almost cultural political divides that are going on inside the BBC. A new DG cannot resolve that just like that.
Stuart, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Stuart Purvis, the former ITN Chief Executive.
Really interesting to hear some of those issues come up. Wilf, it really does show you, doesn't it, the kind of things that the BBC are grappling with as well. Time for some sport now. We've got Jackie here with us. I'd love to have you here, Jackie. It's been a busy football weekend. It feels like one of those weekends in football where things change. The Premier League and the title race, things suddenly shift.
And also, I think because there are so many teams in Europe now, they're spreading out. So you used to get like all the matches on a Saturday, and then you'll have one or two on a Sunday. And now it's very much split 50-50. But my goodness, Arsenal waking up this morning going, what's that heavy breathing on my shoulder?
Exactly.
It's Manchester City. Like all of a sudden, there's a title race on our hands, and my goodness, it was just so one-sided against Liverpool. I don't think anyone could really have predicted how one-sided it was. I mean, yes, it could have been more because there was a missed penalty or a saved penalty from Erling Haaland, but 3-0 is pretty comprehensive, and they just had great fun out there. I mean, Jeremy Doku was the chief tormentor of Liverpool yesterday, scored a brilliant third goal as well. Liverpool had a goal disallowed, and they would say that should not have been disallowed, but it wouldn't have made any difference, and Arne Slot said they were by far the better side. 5 defeats and 6 in the Premier League for Liverpool, so it is looking really tricky for them to defend that title. I mean, I know it's still early, but last season they lost 4 matches all season.
Yeah, it's extreme.
Can I just say, you said now we've got a title race on it. There's always been a title race. We've gone
but now
from,
it's felt like
but we've gone from Liverpool.
Everyone,
they won their first 5 games. Everyone's like, Liverpool going to run away from it. And then suddenly everyone was like, Arsenal have got this as a lock. I mean, none of
How
it
are
is
you
a
feeling?
lock.
You feeling nervous?
No, I feel...
Is that Arsenal fan, by the way?
I feel good. We're in a better position we've been for years. But a madness for anyone to suggest anything is over yet. By the way, multiple teams will be top before the end of the season.
But what was interesting about Arsenal, though, at the weekend, I mean, I know it was on Saturday, but the fact they hadn't, conceded any goals since September, they've only conceded 3 all season, and then they concede 2 in a match, and Sunderland are really good at scoring 90-plus minutes. They've scored more goals, 90-plus minutes than any...
I almost didn't mind, by the way. They've done so well. I didn't mind that equaliser, almost, because they're sort of quite a likeable team this season. Just quickly tell us what happened in the F1 as well.
Yes, Lando Norris, 24 points clear, had a perfect weekend in Brazil. He won the sprint race, he then won the race from pole position, but Max Verstappen must have had one of the drives of the season because he started from the pit lane and then he finished in 3rd, which is extraordinary that he managed to do that. But, very much Lando Norris's to lose, 24 points clear, 3 races and 1 sprint race to go.
Yeah, going to be, and obviously McLaren in the constructors way out in front already. Finally, we've got a bit of
bit of tennis. Yeah, so the WTA finals, which is the sort of crown jewel, the best of the best, top 8 players at the end of the season, they all play each other for the trophy, who is the best of the best. Anyway, Elena Rybakina won it. She's on a great roll, beat the world #1. She claimed over £5 million, 5.25 million prize money in dollars, not pounds. You get
Still not bad.
You get $3 million for winning Wimbledon. But this was very controversial that they took women's tennis to Saudi. And again, it was packed at the final, but it wasn't packed all week.
I want to ask you about this because I do think it's really... We were out of time this hour, but on Saudi Arabia and the whole context of sports washing, I think it's such an interesting subject, really.
And particularly women's tennis as well is very interesting.
Jackie, thanks very much. Awful lot of news coming up in just a few moments' time. Of course, we're going to be talking about that big story, the double resignation at the top of the BBC.
We'll hear from the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown next.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Hello, good morning. It is 8 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
With Sophie and Wilf, good morning from me as well. Lots to get to.
Two BBC bosses, the Director General Tim Davey and the Chief Executive of News Deborah Turness, quit over an impartiality scandal.
Donald Trump claims the credit welcoming their departures and saying a BBC Panorama programme was purposefully dishonest over an edit of his speech.
Ofsted launches new school report cards after pressure to end one-word assessments after the death of head teacher Ruth Perry.
We'll be hearing from former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who says the BBC bosses could have kept their jobs if they'd apologised immediately.
If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of news would have had to resign because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for.
Plus, the super typhoon Fang hits the Philippines with winds of over 140 miles an hour, forcing more than 1 million people from their homes.
A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us here on Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Two BBC bosses have quit. The Director General, Tim Davey, and the Head of News, Deborah Turness, have both stepped down over an impartiality row. Over the 5 years Tim Davey's been in the top job at the corporation, he's come under fire over a series of controversies.
It was a Panorama documentary and accusations it misled viewers by editing a speech from Donald Trump. So he appeared to explicitly encourage the Capitol Hill riots of 2021 that effectively led to his ultimately having to go. The former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has told Sky News they could have kept their jobs, though, if they dealt with the crisis at the time and apologised immediately.
Today, the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, is also expected to apologise. The US President's welcomed the move, accusing those involved of being dishonest. Well, we've got full team coverage for you. Mari's here for the political fallout and Katie's outside BBC HQ in central London. Katie, let's go to you first of all. I mean, just bring everyone up to speed of what's happened in the last 12 hours, I guess.
What a start to the week, really, for the corporation itself, as two of the biggest jobs here at this organisation are now up for grabs following a double resignation, which we heard the news of last night. There's been no sign of Tim Davey certainly coming in the front way this morning, but it is now an exercise in working out who will take over for him. Tim Davey is a Director General that has weathered many, many storms over the last couple of years. We've had the Strictly scandal, we've had Greg Wallace, we've had Gary Lineker's tweets being sort of held up and brought to light. We've had the Gaza documentary and questions over the narrator being the child of a Hamas official. But it was what sealed Tim Davey's fate ultimately was this leaked memo which emerged last week, published by The Telegraph. It was a memo leaked by Michael Prescott, a former external advisor to the BBC's own editorial standards committee, pointing to an episode of Panorama and how they'd spliced together a Donald Trump speech ahead of the Capitol riots in a particularly misleading way. Look, it's generated over the last week criticism from across the board, and I mean, we're in this position where resignations have come about because the BBC remained silent for days and days. We didn't hear from Tim Davey until last night. I think we found ourselves in a situation where he had little choice, really, but to resign. Look, politicians from all sides have been weighing in on this. Here's what former Prime Minister Gordon Brown told us of his interpretation of the situation.
I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. And an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of news would have had to resign because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for. And I think that is where trust becomes an issue.
We'll have the full interview with Gordon Brown a little later, but there's a political dimension to this as well that I want to talk to Mari about as well, because obviously it's all about Donald Trump and Donald Trump doesn't take these things quietly. I think we should just bring you actually what he did post on Truth Social. So this is the US president. The top people in the BBC, including Tim Davey, the boss, are all quitting/fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January the 6th. Thank you to The Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists. These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they're from a foreign country, one that many consider a #1 ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. I mean, Mari, it's, you know, no holds barred from Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways very typical Donald Trump fashion in terms of attacking what he sees as fake news and left-wing news and trying to make sure that he is kind of demonstrating to the world that he's in charge and that actually, potentially, he has some sway over who stays and who goes. Now, that's not necessarily the case, but I'm sure that Donald Trump, to an extent, would like us to kind of believe that, at least. And so he is kind of, to an extent, doing a bit of a victory lap over what has happened at the BBC and these resignations. And what's really kind of almost ironic is in that tweet that you just read, he talks about, you know, a foreign nation almost, you know, interfering in an election. He doesn't say it in those words, but he's kind of alluding to that, whilst seemingly doing a victory lap and perhaps slightly claiming credit for these resignations, which in some ways would also be a foreign nation, perhaps slightly meddling in British affairs.
Yeah, well,
so it's slightly ironic.
For sure. There's often irony, I think, in those Trump posts, for sure. Let's go back to Katie quickly, because Katie, spin it forward for us. We'll hear from the chair of the BBC today. Do we know when and what to expect from him? But then I guess he's suddenly got an unbelievably important task at hand, which will be working out who will be the next Director General. That is ultimately his choice as chair?
Yes, and unlike the appointment of the role of the chair himself, which does require government approval in itself, the sort of influence of government over this is a bit more indirect, if you like, because it's a decision that is taken by the BBC board. But don't forget that on the BBC board you have people like Sir Robbie Gibb, who was a former advisor to Theresa May. So there is that sort of indirect political influence that will be sort of a presence in the room, if you like. The question now, of course, is who will replace Mr. Davey. There's some speculation that perhaps we could now see the first female Director General. The name that was touted back when Tim Davey was in the running was Jane Turton, the chief executive of all three media. There's questions whether or not she might be a front runner this time around. Also, a name that's being brought up is the founder of Tortoise Media, former director of the BBC News, James Harding. What you have to think, though, is this is a role that only comes with a salary of £500,000, which to most normal people sounds like an extraordinary amount of money, but compared to what these figures could be earning in the private sector, actually, and given the hassle that a role like this can create, it's actually not a lot of money compared to what they could be making elsewhere.
Well, it's an awful lot of money. I think it's the hassle, as you say, that perhaps changes things, and that was clearly referred to a little bit in some of the comments that we've heard from Tim Davey. Katie, thank you so much for that. More from Katie throughout the day, particularly when we hear from the chair. Mari, just again on the political side of things, so the government doesn't directly choose the Director General. I'm sure they'll sort of make their rough views known, though. But they do decide, almost more importantly for the BBC, which is why it's so important that they draw a line under this and have leadership in place soon, the BBC Charter. When does that come up?
So it's a 10-year process, so 2017 to 2027. So the end of 2027 is when the current charter will end. And essentially, the government has a kind of review process every decade, and they will decide what the new charter will be. And that's important because it's about the funding model to an extent. So Labour have committed to keeping the licence fee as it is until the end of this charter. But after that, there's a world in which perhaps that could change. And of course, that's going to bring concern, nervousness to people at the BBC. And now you've got this kind of scandal to an extent that is unfolded, and you're getting more and more people on the right of politics calling for, you know, defunding the BBC or abolition of the licence fee. There potentially could be political pressure when you get to that kind of crunch point toward the end of the charter, where people are saying, hold on a second, is this still the best funding model? And are people really getting bang for their buck? And so that adds a level of pressure. There isn't a feeling, I think, if you speak to some people in the BBC, that under Labour they should be perhaps slightly more secure. Of course, we never know what might happen if we have an early election, who might next be the Prime Minister, for instance.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see. And as you say, with all of that stuff going on in the background, all these really big questions about the future of the BBC, it feels like whoever replaces Tim Davey is going to be such a critical appointment as well.
So crucial. And their biggest job will be that charter negotiation, which, they've got time to get ready for, but it's... I guess something that Davey would have been preparing for years already, and that preparation's out the window now.
Now, next this morning, parents in England are about to see a new kind of Ofsted report card. It's brought in after changes to school inspections after the death of the head teacher, Ruth Perry, in 2023.
A coroner later ruled that the inspection had contributed to her suicide, which sparked national outrage and calls for a more compassionate approach to school inspections.
Well, under the new system, inspectors are going to be rating schools across several key areas instead of a single grade. But some, including the Association of School and College Leaders, have criticised the new system for putting even more pressure on teachers. Well, education reporter Anjum Pirbakis is here. Great to have you with us, Anjum. What do you make of the new Ofsted scoring?
So I think there's definitely more detail available for parents in the new report card system, and there's more areas in which they can focus on. So, for example, if their concern is inclusion or SEND provision, for example, special educational needs and disabilities provision, there's something that can be done in terms of a more granular approach to what's available in the information about a school. But the concerns, I think, that are being raised today are from the Association of School and College Leaders and also the National Association of Head Teachers, where they're really worried about the amount of workload that's going to be perpetuated by this new report card system. And also they're saying that there is not really a sustainable approach here, and that Sir Martin Oliver and his team at Ofsted haven't really listened to what the sector have been saying following the tragic death of Ruth Perry, a head teacher whose school was downgraded, and that's a real concern.
Do all sides, including the unions and organisations that represent head teachers, accept that there needs to be external reviews of schools and that needs to then be published for all parents to see in some way? Because if that step is accepted, then it's kind of really hard to find a way that will please both sides, people that want information, easy to access information to compare schools, versus those that don't want them to be, simplified too much.
I think it's understood that there needs to be an accountability measure and an audit, if you like, of the sector and schools, especially where parents need that information. But I think it's the manner in which it's done. There are ways and ways of doing things, and I think we've gone from one model to another model that has exacerbated the issues, and that's what the sector's
people think it's gotten worse?
Yes.
Do you think that there'll be some who look at this and think that the unions are just never going to be happy, that they didn't like the single word judgments, and now they don't like judgments with more words in it, so they're just not going to be pleased by any inspection?
I think the fact that we've arrived at this point and the reason for the changes were the outrage that was sparked after the death of Ruth Perry and the impact on the sectors. And I've also spoken to school leaders and have had numerous interactions with teachers across the sector who've always said that Ofsted is an incredibly stressful process already. But what this seems to do is exacerbate the measure of the accountability, because it has so much more implications for the workload that's involved in an Ofsted inspection under the new report card system.
I just don't really know, and maybe I just missed, what is the solution? That, if they don't like this one and they don't like the one before, what is the solution? What is the idea coming through?
I think the big listen that took place, it did listen to things like well-being within the sector, and I think that report that was done by the education support hasn't truly been factored in. I think parents' perspectives have been factored into the new process, but actually the way that the support was required for the sector and school leaders and teachers, that hasn't really been factored in. And I think there needs to be a compromise between Ofsted. Yes, we're not saying take away accountability measures, we're not saying we don't want to have judgments, but I think it needs to work with the system and not kind of in a silo with parents alone and listening to those voices on their own.
Andrew, great stuff.
Really
Thanks so
interesting.
much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be talking more about that as well later on in the programme. Now, Gordon Brown has partnered with Prince William's Homewards charity to furnish 250 homes across the country. The partnership's part of the former Prime Minister's campaign to end child poverty.
Now, we talked to Gordon Brown earlier this morning about his new initiative and also, of course, about the upcoming budget and the controversy around the BBC. We started the interview asking him what he's hoping to achieve with this partnership.
There are so many people who are either in temporary accommodation on the streets or just doesn't have substandard accommodation. There's a report today saying that that's 300,000 families in the United Kingdom, 180,000 children in temporary accommodation. Now, Prince William has taken this up as an issue. He's formed a charity, Homewards. He wants to renovate 250 homes in the next few months. It's a 5-year project. He started in Aberdeen, and I know about it because I'm in Scotland. I went to Sheffield to work with him when he launched his project in Sheffield. And he is committed not only to providing homes for people, and we are going to furnish them through our charity, but he also wants to prevent homelessness. So that's about getting people jobs. It's about giving people the kind of confidence to go out into the world and getting them off the streets, if that's where they are at the moment. And, you know, what Prince William has done is really interesting, because just as his mother took up causes that were never really reported very much, like HIV/AIDS and landmines, and she took up homelessness, he's taking up causes that he is making people understand something that otherwise, without his intervention, wouldn't be understood. Mental health, the environment, and now homelessness. So it's a great pleasure for our charity to work with his.
You're talking there about issues that people don't really understand. And I just think that's quite interesting in relation to homelessness, because often there is a bit of a stereotype about people who are homeless, that they are drug addicts, that they've refused help. I just was quite struck with what you said about the number of children who are homeless.
The number of children, 170,000 in England and 200,000 or so in the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, the reason that people are in trouble is usually something unexpected, unplanned happens in a family. You could have cancer, you could have a death, you could have a redundancy, you could have the breakup of a family. These are all causes of emergencies and crises. So some people land up on the streets. Mothers have to leave, maybe because of domestic violence, and they become homeless. Children, of course, some are put into care, which is a very expensive way of dealing with something if you can keep the family together. So what we've got to understand is there are so many unexpected, unplanned for, you know, things that happen in people's lives. Now, if people have resources, they can cope with it. If you've got savings, you might be able to do something about it. But I was always struck by 1 in 4 people with cancer who are under 65 are also people who are officially in poverty. And so they are pushed into very difficult circumstances. But it's the children, I think, Prince William and I are most worried about.
Someone who's sleeping rough on the streets, you know, in a sleeping bag, maybe on a couple of cardboard boxes to try and keep warm, you know, that's a symptom of a society that is kind of broken down in some way, right? That because other organisations will have failed before that, whether that's, you know, the NHS, social services, housing, education, whatever it is. What do you think it says about the state of Britain?
Well, it is possible to deal with homelessness. You know, when we were in government, we actually reduced it very substantially. It has risen partly through COVID, energy prices, everything else in the last few years. And yes, nobody should be, particularly children, should be out there vulnerable because they're either in really bad temporary accommodation and being moved from place to place, or actually young people out on the streets. So it does say something that we've got to improve the healthcare. A lot of this is mental illness. We've got to build houses. So the government is committed to building, I think, 180,000 new homes. They're spending 39 billion in the next 10 years on social housing, so that's a good thing. But you've got to also deal with the problem as it arises.
Another area you're very passionate about is child poverty. And just last week in a speech, you made clear you thought the 2-child benefit cap should be lifted in full, not partially, which has been mooted in recent weeks. Is this an area that you think rises above the cost, that it just has to be done?
Well, how we treat our children, just as how we treat our old people, is, as was just being said, it's a verdict on the state of your society. And if 4.5 million children are in poverty, you've got to do something about it. Now, I'm actually confident that the Child Poverty Review that the government rightly set up, immediately they came into office, it's taken some time, it's going to report in the next few weeks. So I am confident that the 2-child rule will be addressed. And I'm confident that breakfast clubs, help with free school meals, family centres, all these things that I think are really important to the upbringing of a child. I'm confident that this report is going to do something about it.
2 areas I've seen you speak again in a speech last week that you think would be worth doing: gambling taxes and also the banks levy you think could go up.
Well, I've been responding to government consultations. So the government had a consultation on child poverty, and I responded to that. The government hasn't yet got a policy, so I'm not trying to tell the government to change its policy. I'm saying this is the new policy, and this would be a good way of doing it. Gambling, they also have had a consultation on that. So they've asked the public their views, and I responded. Now, gambling causes some social harm, and I think the Gambling Council that came before the Select Committee of the Treasury were not prepared to admit the social harm that's caused. So there's a big case for change, and I think I was making that case, but I'm responding to a consultation. The government wants to make a change. What is the change will come out, I think, in the budget. But I believe that the gambling industry has made huge profits. A lot of them are based in tax havens. They use a thing called transfer pricing to reduce what the profits look like, and they're very profitable anyway. So I think they can well afford to pay a tax. And I want that money to go to child poverty, because you've got something where there is potential for social bad, because you've got addiction, you've got problem gambling in some of the poorest communities. So move the money from, if you like, the bad by taxing it and put it to a good, which is children taken out of poverty.
Yeah, as you say, it's all kind of linked, isn't it, with drivers of poverty and stuff as well. And you were just saying, I know you're very careful not to be a backseat driver, and you don't want to...
I don't want to, and I do respect
and I get
Rachel
that.
Reeves. She's got huge issues to deal with. Look, in the last year, it's quite incredible what has actually happened. Defence and security has become a huge issue. Now, if you say you've got to increase your defence expenditure from 2% to 5%, you know, that's 180 billion pounds. That's bigger than any budget for schools. It's just as big as the budget for the English Health Service. So she's got these huge problems to meet. And then you've got tariffs. You've got what's happening in America, and protectionism around the world is affecting British exports. So she's dealing with new circumstances, and I think that's got to be respected. But I'm not going to comment on the individual items. You know, there used to be a period when I was Chancellor when nobody talked about a budget before.
I know, and now it's changed. It's true.
Yeah, and one Chancellor had to resign when he gave out the figures of the budget in advance. So I'm not going to be the backseat driver.
Can I ask you a question that isn't about the budget, right? It feels much bigger than that in some ways. Do you think there's a discrepancy in the UK where, you know, the amount of tax that we think we should pay and the level of public services that we expect are kind of out of whack? Like, we want to pay US taxes for Scandinavian public services.
This has always been said to be the case. It's always a balancing act. You know, I did 11 budgets, believe it or not. So I was a Chancellor for 10 years. And you've always got this dilemma, because you want your public service to be good, and they've got to be efficient, and particularly the health service, because we've got a unique health service in Britain. And I think anybody who's looked at health services around the world thinks that a health service that's free at the point of need is something that really means that if you're ill, you don't need to worry about whether you have money to pay for the service you're getting. And then you've got tax, and people don't like tax. You know, I had to put up tax to pay for the National Health Service, and we allocated money from National Insurance to the Health Service. And of course, it was popular at the time because people knew we had to do something about the Health Service. But of course, after that, people thought, oh, well, I'm actually paying more tax. Why is that? You know, so you've got to balance this all the time. It is a balancing act. And yes, Europe has got high level. Look, France, I think, is 45% of national income. We're 37% of national income. So we're much lower taxed than France and most of Europe, where I think the average is about 40%, and we're about 37, maybe 38%. But of course, we want to have European levels of public services, and that's it's a natural thing to want, but it's a balancing act. And I respect Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. They're having to make very difficult decisions.
Can I just quickly, to wrap things up, ask you a little bit about the BBC? I think it's fair to say that President Trump has played some role in the pressure that built on the BBC in the last week.
He plays a role in just about everything at the moment, doesn't he?
But is that okay?
Look, trust is what matters here. If you're a newscaster or a broadcaster, and this is true of Sky, it's true of every broadcaster, true of ITN, true of BBC, you've got to be trusted. And I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. And an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of news would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for. And I think that is where trust becomes an issue. So the BBC, you are trusted by the country, more so than politicians. You are trusted, and you don't want to lose that trust. It is so important. So a mistake, if it's made, and people will always make mistakes. I mean, Glastonbury was a mistake for the BBC. The Princess Diana interview, remember, years ago was a mistake. And you know that your reputation depends on being trusted to give proper information and not fake news. And when you make a mistake, I think this is the real problem here. A mistake was made, but an apology should be made immediately. And a year later, it does cast doubts about whether we responded quickly enough to a problem.
Does this solve the issue, or do you think there's an institutional bias, which is a term that's been used.
I don't personally think there's an institutional bias. I think, everyday news, we're talking about isolated incidents over a period of time, and you can blow that up into being a sort of huge crisis. But I think we can solve this problem. But all the time, we've got to think we're in a world of fake news, social media, propaganda, people sort of putting their opinions across and not based on information, and a lot of people are responsible for that. So you do need the trusted broadcaster, and that is your unique selling point. Both of you and all the rest of the journalists who work for all the different broadcasters, we depend on you being trusted, and we depend on you being accurate. And you will make mistakes. I'm not saying you'll make mistakes.
No, we
but
will.
Mistakes will be made, but they've got to be corrected immediately. So a year's gap is just not good enough. I think that's the problem.
It's been great to have you on, as always. Really interesting to get your thoughts on things. Thank you.
Do you know what? I came away from that thinking, gosh, he's so thoughtful on all of these topics. If we start in reverse order, just on that BBC point, because there's a lot of noise today, and understandably as well from our friends and colleagues at the BBC, but ultimately what he is saying there, the reason we led to resignations was because leadership didn't come out and own an error, and it was an error, quickly enough and soon enough. And that's really what this comes down to, I think, more than anything else. Not to say that the error was the most monumental one ever made, or that it's something that happens regularly. And clearly he said he doesn't think there's an institutional bias, which I think is really important going forward. But I think he kind of hit the nail on the head on what triggered ultimately the resignation.
Yeah, I think that's right as well. And also the other thing it's quite important to say is Gordon Brown, it feels, is saying that and is making that direct criticism as someone who is naturally a friend of the BBC. Like, he believes in the BBC, right? He believes that overall it does, or it tries to do a good job. But it's that failure, as you say, to own the mistake and then to wait so long before dealing with it or even acknowledging it that led to those two resignations.
What did you make of some of his other comments there, where clearly he's so passionate about homelessness, he's so passionate about child poverty, but he also, and I believe genuinely, doesn't want to backseat drive Rachel Reeves, but there's sort of a hint that you have to drop the two-child benefit cap at least.
Oh, yeah, I think he would say that, to be totally honest as well. It's interesting with Gordon Brown because he is someone who you can see kind of wrestling with it, I think. He knows he doesn't want to be a backseat driver. He knows how difficult the job is. He knows that he can't just get in there like, the kind of former Prime Minister, the former Chancellor, telling them all how it's done. And yet, I think this is a person who genuinely looks at the state of the country, who believes that child poverty is getting worse over the last kind of decade or so. He believes that people are on the brink, that families are on the brink, that children are hungry, cold, all of these things, and he can't not speak out. So it's like he's always trying to thread the needle between campaigning for the things that he cares about, but also doing it in a way that isn't seen to directly criticise the government. I think that there is an implied criticism of some policies. I think that is fair to say.
The gambling tax he was pretty explicit on, so maybe that's something he's been given cover to say because it's coming, so it won't seem as criticism. Just very quickly, broadly, there's a point he referred to there as the overall tax burden. To your really apt question about more broadly, are we expecting too much as a nation? See, he pointed to the fact that we're at 37-38% as an overall tax burden in this country and that France is at 45%. I would respectfully say to him he's cherry-picking a little bit there, because when he was Prime Minister and or Chancellor, our tax burden was much closer to the low 30%. So, yes, we are below where France is today, but that doesn't automatically mean, we might as well tax more. And we could have picked him up if we weren't so out of time to say, well, hold on, it's about 6 or 7 percentage points higher than when you were in charge. So, I do think there's an argument where you can say, we've got to pay for this and we can afford to put this tax up. But there's a limit to all of these things, and it was low when he was in power.
Really, really interesting to hear from Gordon Brown there. He, of course, was pretty explicit talking about the BBC, and we're going to be, of course, discussing that even more after the break. We've got more guests on it coming up, including someone who used to work at the BBC.
She was beautiful, she was bright, she had so much potential.
This wasn't an accident. Those individuals that didn't do their job properly, as far as I'm concerned, Nick, they need to be in a dock.
I don't know why a local authority would be trying so hard to avoid scrutiny.
Is cover-up too strong?
I don't think it is. The evidence is there. Nanita should never have died.
And I'm not the only one.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, DC.
Well, welcome back to Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Let's remind you of the top stories. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has told Sky News that Tim Davey and Deborah Turness could have kept their jobs if the BBC had dealt with the accusations about their Panorama documentary when they first arose a year ago. The pair resigned yesterday following claims the BBC had misled viewers by editing a speech from Donald Trump, so he appeared to explicitly encourage the Capitol Hill riots in January 2021. I thought that was going to be a headline, so I read it. It was kind of the full story.
That's okay. That's all good. Don't worry, Wilf. Well, now those resignations that Wilf was just talking about so fully have been welcomed by the US president, describing their situation as a terrible thing for democracy. In a Truth Social post, Mr. Trump described Tim Davey and Deborah Turness as very dishonest people and accused them of trying to step on the scales of a presidential election.
Schools will now be graded across a range of topics during Ofsted visits after changes were put in place following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023. Instead of a single grade, schools will now receive detailed report cards that assess quality of education, behaviour, leadership and personal development.
The US Senate has taken its first big step to ending the longest ever shutdown of the American government. It's been 41 days and now a group of Democrats have agreed to finally support plans to extend federal funding, which has disrupted all kinds of things, including air travel.
So our top story this morning, a double resignation of bosses at the BBC. The Director General, Tim Davey, and the Head of News, Deborah Turness, have both stepped down over an impartiality row. And if we just recap, viewers, this sort of really started to snowball last week when a report came to light from some Telegraph reporting that had been written by Michael Prescott. He was an internal BBC advisor, and there was a number of things he pointed to about potential questions over impartiality. But I think the chief one was that this Panorama report had doctored a speech by Donald Trump, a report that came out 8 days before the election last year, based on a speech that Donald Trump had given during the Capitol Hill riots. And I think central to it wasn't, in fact, necessarily the edit initially. It was that this report was then discussed by Turness and Davey in May this year, and nothing was done about it.
Exactly. I've been keeping track of some of the reactions from people who worked at the BBC or continue to work at the BBC. And I have to say, it kind of split people a little bit as well. John Simpson, of course, the award-winning foreign correspondent, saying Tim Davey was one of the best Director Generals the BBC has had. Deborah Turness was a brilliant head of news. Only the BBC's enemies could possibly be glad they've resigned. We've now got a real fight on our hands to defend public service broadcasting. So that's kind of one side of the argument, the side that's saying this is Donald Trump effectively trying to interfere in public service broadcasting in the UK. The other side of the coin, someone like Rob Burley, for example, used to edit the Andrew Markle programme, worked at Sky for a bit, I should say, as well, for full disclosure, says, hard to think of a worse Director General than Davey, embarrassing, Turness out of her depth, all US TV hype. Davey was a massive negative for political coverage. So there is different views at play here about what it all means.
Different views at play and some very strongly held opinions, understandably, including from people at the BBC who feel last week already was starting to snowball in a way that was unfair and tarnishing the entire BBC News operation with as if one particular video edit was the norm. And also feel this morning that these two resignations almost feel like they're admitting they're in the wrong. And again, I completely understand that very unfair sentiment. But I do think, and we've mentioned Gordon Brown already, gets to the heart of this, which is the resignations come because of being aware of something that was wrong 6 months ago and not doing anything about it. You know, so often it's not the initial error, it's the actions that come afterwards or don't come afterwards. And in that sense, that's really what's at the heart of this.
Yeah, and I think it just shows the kind of challenge for whoever does become the next Director General as well. Let's talk education now, because teachers, of course, typically grade students, but schools are also going to be graded. It's part of changes by the education regulator to try and measure standards so parents can work out, you know, compare and contrast on schools.
And the move comes, of course, after primary school head teacher Ruth Perry died by suicide. And the Teachers' Union warned staff will be worse off under the new system. Joining us is Pepe De Lacio, the Secretary-General of the Association of Schools and College Leaders. Thank you so much for joining us on this topic. What's your quick snapshot scorecard? I wasn't thinking of making a joke on that. What was your quick view on the new rules that have come in?
Let's just be clear. We think that schools should be accountable for the spending of public money, and it's important that parents have really clear information about what a school's doing well, what a school might need to be improving on. And so we welcome the idea of more information, clarity of information to parents. But what we've got here is a recognition also that we feel that head teachers, school and college leaders need to be recognised for their well-being and their health. This began with the tragic death of Ruth Perry, as you've highlighted, back in 2023. But Ofsted have had repeated opportunities to listen to the workforce and take teachers and head teachers with them, and they've failed to recognise a damning coroner's report, their own health and well-being commission that they set up independently themselves, and also reports from former chief inspectors as well. And what we're saying is, please listen to us, listen to what the workforce is saying, and work with us to help make this better than what it is right now.
Of course, they say that they have listened to all of those cases. On the headline, is it unanimously agreed by all your members, by you, that there has to be independent investigations and report cards made public for all schools, or not?
We've done a survey in the last 2 months surveying our members on what they think about the new proposals, and over 75% of our members have said that they think it is worse than the previous set of frameworks and inspection framework that we had. So when we're trying to do something that's better, to end up with something that's worse is not a good position to be in, really.
But I guess everyone says that we do need to have external and public investigations and scorecards on schools.
We feel that most organisations that hold professional bodies to account have got a level of independence to them and an independent scrutiny. We would certainly support an independent evaluation and an independent body scrutinising what happens in inspections. But at the moment, we've got Ofsted marking their own homework, which is totally unacceptable.
So what would be the headline suggestion you have that would be a change to this that you'd welcome?
We want to see the formation of an independent review body to look at complaints against Ofsted. We'd also like to see some independence to evaluations of inspections that take place. At the moment, if a head teacher is unhappy about some of the process or what happens in an inspection, they have to report that to another inspector, and that can often feel like you're reporting this to a friend of somebody else that's made a judgment, and that doesn't give that sense of autonomy or independence that we think we need in this situation.
Just finally on that, I mean, is most of the pushback you get from schools that haven't necessarily had the best results recently, or is it quite broad?
I think this is broadly a decision across the whole of the sector. We were consulted on this earlier in the year, and although Ofsted haven't released the outcome of that consultation, I think it's widely agreed that some independence and some scrutiny that's neutral and autonomous would be welcomed by everybody across the sector.
Thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Interesting stuff, it really is. Now, I just want to take you to the US because the Senate has taken the first major step towards ending America's longest ever government shutdown.
It's now been 41 days since the shutdown began, but last night a group of moderate Democrats agreed to support federal funding plans.
I should say that is without any guarantee that healthcare subsidies would be extended by the Republicans. Now, Wilf, the whole concept of a government shutdown, as someone who's worked in Westminster for like most of my working life, slightly blows my mind.
I think the headline of it makes it sound worse than it is, though clearly it's very significant. I mean, the very fact that you can have the longest ever for 41 days, but for most people in America, not all, nothing's really seemingly happened. The stock market's still at record highs, for example. The second longest was in Trump's first term, ironically, for 35 days. Obama had one for I think 13 days. Clinton had one for a little bit longer. So they do happen. They happen because the Congress and the president can't agree on everyday spending plans. And even though Trump has both houses of Congress, for some of these bills in the Senate, you need 60 votes. You need a supermajority, and he doesn't have that. So what's happened in the last couple of days is enough Democrats have come round to say, look, guys, we've just got to get forward on this, put aside our differences so that everything can be funded again. And like anything, it's public ire that triggers people to get to that point. And you mentioned it earlier, it's flight delays, because a lot of federal employees are involved with the air traffic control process. Flight delays are starting to get more pronounced. We're approaching Thanksgiving, which is the busiest weekend of travel across America. And I think that sort of forces hands, even if then both sides have to give up on some of the reasons why they didn't agree in the first place.
Washington looking particularly beautiful, I should say, at this time. From my kind of, if you allow me to kind of politically kind of geek out for a minute, I think it's quite interesting as well, because it just shows the different types of governance that we have across the world and the changes between them as well. Because obviously, in the UK, you'd never get a situation where the House of Lords was effectively overruling the Commons. It's like these different ways of doing things, all with, I guess, pluses and minuses.
Well, for sure. I mean, obviously, two equally powerful houses in Congress versus here, we only really have one. I mean, look, the biggest difference you have is that here, the executive is literally drawn from the legislature. And when you have a big majority, normally it means you're all powerful until it's your own party that starts to trip you up, which is what we have. So we all have our own different ways of holding things to account. But the executive is definitely growing in power in the US, which is another debate.
Now to the Philippines, because Super Typhoon Fangwong has hit land, bringing winds of up to 143 miles an hour, torrential rain, and also some really dangerous storm surges as well.
At least 2 people have been killed and more than 1 million people were forced to evacuate their homes. The country's already dealing with the destruction of Typhoon Kalmegi, which left more than 220 people dead when it hit a few days ago. The president's declared a state of emergency there.
You can see there some of the images. We hope, of course, that the typhoon aftermath won't be as bad as expected. But I should say, it's weakened. It's now passing over the South China Sea, expected to head to Taiwan next after leaving 2 people dead in the Philippines. More than 1 million people evacuated. But the good news, I think, is that despite those pictures that you're seeing, which show some of the devastation and, I guess, the full force of the storm, the damage has been less than expected there.
We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, Sophie's going to be speaking to the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, Andrew Griffith. Particularly looking forward, Sophie, to that interview and his views on the BBC. Of course, he used to be a senior media executive himself. He was here at Sky in his former life. That interview coming up next.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Over the next 45 days, an estimate 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. We take you to the heart of the story in the largest democracy in the world.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionately. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees. They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left. It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
The Data and Forensics team is a multi-skilled unit dedicated to providing transparency in journalism. We followed a social media trail that led us to Bristol, where a confrontation between protesters erupted into a full-scale riot.
Here it really is pitched battle skirmishes, hurling missiles, throwing punches.
We gather, analyse and visualise data to tell data-driven stories. Sky News has been given exclusive data. Sky News has seen 72,000 posts used in this way. Elon Musk says it is, quote, a viper's nest of radical left Marxists who hate America.
I think we would generally be called far right, sure.
It's called Return to the Land, and they invited me in. Its founder says he is building a fortress for the white race.
I kind of want to ask you, after seeing this, do you think what we're doing is immoral?
I'm Tom Cheshire, Sky's data and forensics correspondent.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, welcome back to Mornings with Ridge and Frost. Jackie's here. We're delighted to say she's back again to take us through some of the great action which unfolded over the course of the weekend. We're going to start, sorry, I should have said, with football and the Premier League. What was the big takeaways for you?
Well, I just think Manchester City was so good and it was so one-sided against Liverpool. That was billed as the match of the weekend, and, on paper it is, but they ran away with it. I mean, Jeremy Doku was just chief tormentor. He scored a great third goal. I mean, it could have been 4-0 because there was a penalty saved right at the beginning by Haaland. Then Haaland sort of made amends for it by getting a goal himself. I mean, they are just breathing down Arsenal's neck in that race for the Premier League title, just 4 points behind. 28 goals for Erling Haaland now, club and country. I mean, that's just mad. They are mad numbers. 1,000th match for Pep Guardiola, and I just think, for Liverpool, most expensive player in the history of the Premier League, Isak, not even fit to come on and try and help rescue that situation. It's 5 defeats in 6 Premier League matches for Liverpool. It's extraordinary. And last season they barely lost, four defeats.
I'm interested in this, and also just apologies, Will, for making you sit through this as an Arsenal fan, by the way. Feeling the pressure.
We're still top of the league.
Yeah.
We'll nix all Premier League discussion when we fall off the top.
But Jackie, you mentioned there about how how much it's changed. I think it is quite fascinating, isn't it? Because last season, Liverpool were all conquering. Yeah. Man City were riven with kind of self-doubt. Pep looked like he was on the brink almost. Haaland wasn't firing. It's just, I find the psychology of sport kind of fascinating, that things can just change.
It is fascinating, and I think the whole Haaland thing as well. He's almost decided, do you know what, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm just going to single-handedly drag us over the line. And it isn't obviously as simple as that, but it feels a bit like that. Pep had personal problems last year, and you don't know how that might have affected things off the pitch as well. Liverpool are slightly rebuilding. Pep had that rebuilding sort of scenario last year, and now he's trying to do what great managers do. Like Sir Alex Ferguson could rebuild a team and then recreate another great team, then recreate another great team, and he's now trying to do that. But, Arsenal, I think maybe to be held by Sunderland to a 2-2 draw might be quite a good thing. It kind of reminds you that you are fallible and that you can actually concede goals.
We all knew we were fallible, though. I think that's the difference this season, is I think kind of we're not taking things for granted. There's a good backbone.
No.
We showed the backbone to come back, and then fair play to... Sunderland, what a story this season.
Oh, I love it, I have to say.
They're fourth this morning. I mean, would have many people have gambled on this? I mean, Sunderland fans obviously would have done, but the fact that Sunderland can score their goals and that equalising goal coming in 90-plus minutes, no other team has scored more goals in 90-plus minutes than Sunderland. And you talk of psychology, Sophie. after the match, the Sunderland manager, Reggie Lebris, was asked about, you know, Arsenal are very good at set pieces and long throws. Did you move the advertising hoardings in so that they couldn't take a big throw and run up? And he said, well, you know, we have to find ways of ways of messing them up and winning the game. Now, he didn't say that they had, but he didn't deny it either. And there is a picture, I think it's Declan Rice taking a throw in, and he can't literally get any run back because there's just no space. There's just no space.
Cheeky but fair play.
I love it.
Jackie,
well, just within the rules. Formula One, we should mention Lando Norris at the weekend.
We're going to do... Are we doing... getting on to the next... I think we've got to get to the...
Go on, very quickly, Jackie, and then we need to say we've got a minister who's probably grumpy, so apologies, Andrew Griffiths.
Sorry. Watch it, he's 24 points clear. It's his to lose. It really is.
We're going to hit that in more detail next time. Great stuff. Jackie, thank you very much.
2025 for the championship leader.
Well, we're talking at the BBC and we're talking politics, of course. Earlier this hour, Gordon Brown told us he's expecting changes to the child benefit cap and gambling taxes in the budget. But, of course, the main story for us as well that he was commenting on too, the turmoil at the BBC with two of those top bosses quitting. We can talk now to the opposition. We're joined by Andrew Griffith, the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, who's in West Sussex for us. Great to have you on. I just want to start with the BBC. Full disclosure, I should probably say you've got a history, of course, working in the media as well. You did used to work for Sky. I'm interested to know your views on what's happening at the BBC. Was it right for Tim Davey and Deborah Turness to resign?
Yeah, look, I think it was ultimately right because if you're in leadership, you have to take full responsibility. And a number of these issues in the Prescott files had been raised and not sufficiently followed up on, but not sufficient of itself, actually, Sophie. I think from Glastonbury to Gary Lineker, there's been too many of these examples. If you're a lover of the BBC, you've got to acknowledge that they have given too much ammunition to your critics. If, like me, you believe there is a little bit of an institutional bias, then this is a chance for that to be properly addressed. We want to put the British back into the British Broadcasting Corporation, pride in our country, but also absolute levels of strict impartiality, the same that I know that Sky seeks to uphold. If you're going to extract licence fees on the threat of sending people to jail, and people do go to jail for non-payment of their licence fee, then you've just got to be above and beyond. And I'm afraid there were too many incidents that cause people concern.
I was interested there to hear you use the word institutional bias. Deborah Turness said in her resignation that she wants to make it absolutely clear that allegations BBC News is institutionally biased are wrong. So do you think it is institutionally biased, and what does that phrase mean for you?
Well, look, she's resigned, so clearly she accepts that there are things that go beyond just one individual incident and one particular journalist. The Prescott report was about their own internal processes and concern about systemic bias on that. And as I say, if you just look at things like the way that Gary Lineker was tolerated far outside the BBC's editorial guidelines, the fawning coverage we get every year with the BBC spending hundreds of people down to Glastonbury, which tends to represent one particular view of society, then I think viewers do genuinely think there is an institutional bias there. The best way to deal with that is to fully oxygenate it. Let's have a proper reform, define what public service broadcasting in
what some would say,
about.
and I'm sorry for interrupting, we just don't have that much time on the interview. What some would say is that, look, this is kind of almost Donald Trumpian interference. He's been tweeting, effectively gloating about it. You've got people like John Simpson coming out saying only the BBC's enemies could possibly be glad they've resigned. Is the BBC under fire from the political right?
No, look, I don't think that's fair. I mean, you've got people who've been long making some of these same points, like Mark Urban and Rod Liddle, both former BBC journalists themselves. So the right thing to do is to engage with this debate, not to immediately label anybody who has concerns about our national broadcaster coming from the far right or anywhere else. In fact, that's a typical category error the BBC makes time and time again. It's possible to love and cherish a national broadcaster while still fundamentally thinking that the way it covers some topics are wrong.
Thank you so much. Always good to have you on the programme there. Andrew Griffiths speaking to us about the BBC.
He mentioned Mark Urban. He'll be talking to us next hour, so we're looking forward to that. We'll continue the coverage of this story. We'll also be talking to Dame Caroline Dinniage, who's the chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, and Matt Smith, Nick Cave.
Oh yeah, I'm excited about that one. See you in just a few moments' time for full coverage of the BBC in turmoil, I think it's probably fair to say, after the resignation of 2 of the top bosses.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Ridge and Frost.
We're Sophy and Wilf. Good morning from both of us. Lots of news about the BBC today.
2 BBC bosses quit over an impartiality scandal. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown says they could have kept their jobs if the corporation had addressed the issue earlier.
If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of news would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for.
Donald Trump claims the credit, welcoming their departures and saying that a BBC Panorama programme was purposefully dishonest over an edit of his speech.
Ofsted launches new school report cards after pressure to end one-word assessments following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry.
And coming up, we'll be talking to Mark Urban, who worked at the BBC for 35 years, for his view about what's going on at the organisation.
And also to come, there's a big new TV show coming here on Sky, The Death of Bunny Munro. The star, Matt Smith, and the writer, Nick Cave, tell us about it.
Good morning, thanks for joining us. The former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, has told Sky News that two BBC bosses could have kept their jobs if they dealt with the crisis around Panorama's coverage of Donald Trump a year ago and immediately apologised. So the Director General, Tim Davey, and the Head of News, Deborah Turness, both stepped down over an impartiality row.
Well, today, the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, is also expected to apologise. The US President has welcomed the move, accusing those involved of being dishonest.
And this morning, Nick Robinson, who of course presents the Today programme on BBC Radio 4, addressed the controversy on air. This is what he had to say.
Ever since the first rumours of the resignation surfaced, I've been piecing together what happened which led to this crisis. Those at the top of the BBC have appeared paralysed for the past week, unable to agree what to say, not just about the editing of that speech, but also wider claims of institutional bias. One source described the arguments that have raged ever since The Telegraph published a leaked memo by a former advisor to the BBC board as, and I quote, like armed combat, another alleged political interference after what they described as a hostile takeover of parts of the BBC.
Well, lots to discuss on this, and thankfully we're joined by Mari for more of the political fallout, and Katie is at the BBC headquarters for us. Katie, I'll come to you first of all, because I guess we get a snapshot there of what the mood is like inside the building behind you, and still a great deal of anger, disappointment that these two resignations last night perhaps haven't drawn a line under.
Yeah, look, staff have been arriving here throughout the morning, once again finding that the BBC itself has become the centre of this story. Tim Davey last night, along with his CEO, Deborah Turness, the CEO of News, both handed their resignations in. Look, he has weathered many a storm over the last couple of years, from Strictly to Greg Wallace to the Glastonbury death chance to questions over Gaza documentaries that they've aired. But what sealed his fate was this leaked memo which emerged last week, leaked by the former external advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee, Michael Prescott. And the real thing that stood out and that just courted so much controversy was the way in which Panorama had spliced together a speech by Donald Trump that he made which preceded the Capitol riots on January the 6th. And it just was outright misleading, and I think it was an indefensible edit that they did of that speech. And I think really, rather than stay silent, which is what we had over the last week or so from Tim Davey, in staying silent in himself, it just really sort of ramped up the attention on him until we got to this position where last night his position was just untenable, really, and he ended up handing in his resignation. Look, it's attracted controversy across the political spectrum, with politicians weighing in on this, and here's what the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown had to say on the matter.
I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. And an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davey or the head of News would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for. And I think that is where trust becomes an issue.
Yeah, Gordon Brown in some ways kind of getting into the heart of it. You know, as a friend of the BBC, it's probably fair to say as well. Mari, I'm interested to get your take on the politics of this too, because Donald Trump's on a bit of a victory lap, I think it's fair to say. His press secretary as well, saying the BBC's dishonest, that everyone should watch GB News instead. What's going on there?
Well, I think the difficulty for the BBC is that, to an extent, the American system in terms of television news is different. It's a different landscape, but also they are regulated differently from the way that we are regulated. And so they are much more able to be partisan as news channels than we can be here in the UK. And so to me, it seems to an extent that they are perhaps slightly exporting that perspective, but it doesn't quite fit here in the UK. And so they are trying to say everybody needs to watch GB News because they feel that GB News is more unbiased or perhaps more sympathetic to their political beliefs than their political persuasions. I think the difficulty now for the BBC is there appears to be a bit of a chaotic management of the situation. So you saw from that clip Nick Robinson talking about some of the issues around the board, but he's also saying that even this morning, the 15 members of the board still have not signed off on the wording of the statement from the BBC chairman, Samir Shah. Now, the BBC is reporting that this is going to be coming later this morning, so there is really not a lot of time left for them to sign off on the wording and get some level of consensus.
It's extraordinary, really.
It really is.
It's interesting because, I mean, I think clearly US broadcasting is different to British broadcasting, but I kind of think that, and parts of what Nick Robinson said there, which is almost as if to imply that these resignations only came out of the poor comms handling of the last 7 days, as opposed to whether there were fundamental issues that triggered the last 7 days in the first place. And you know, I do think whether you're Fox and you lean right of centre or MSNBC or CNN and lean left of centre, in the same way that some of our newspapers lean certain directions, you still come back to the fundamental point. And none of those different organisations would think it's OK to misrepresent a speech. And that's what happened. And I think you've got lots of people, from former BBC people, even current BBC people, that acknowledge that's what happened in that Panorama report. I also think it's fair for Nick Robinson, which I saw in one of his tweets, to say there weren't any complaints at the time the programme went out. But I think that underlines what we're getting at here, which is it could have been solved as an issue quite quickly if someone was, and there's a track record, reprimanded for a poor edit, and we all accept it was wrong and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. But that's not what happened.
Which is
and that's
the
the
Gordon
issue.
Brown argument as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got this, as you say, you know, the kind of statement from Samir Shah that hasn't been signed off on yet. Then you've got this whole new thing about, you know, who on earth is going to be the next Director General? How are they going to negotiate the new charter of the BBC? I mean, there's so many questions.
I also think what's difficult for the BBC at the moment is Gordon Brown made a really good point about, was it the mistake or was it the way the mistake was handled over a 6-month period? So the story came out last week, right? But at the end of the day, they've sat on some of the information for months. And I think that is also something that is contributing to perhaps some of the difficulty and distrust in this. And so we are now in this scenario, we are kind of watching this unfold before our eyes in quite an uncomfortable way. And I think it's so difficult when the connection between the UK and the US is clearly politically so important. And the government and, you know, anyone really with their head screwed on knows we don't want to frustrate the US administration when there's still, you know, tariffs flying around. But nonetheless, it just feels quite uncomfortable this morning.
Katie, just wrap things up for us in terms of what we can expect in the hours ahead. We do expect Samir Shah to come out. You're going to look really great now. We've dried your camera lens for you. That was my arm that came around. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. But yeah, so what's the timeline for today? And then, perhaps more importantly, for the weeks and months ahead, how long does it take to pick a new DG?
I feel like I used my weathering the storm reference too early, didn't I? Look, Tim Davey in his statement last night spoke about the fact that he's not going to have disappeared from here overnight. It's going to be a process that takes a number of months. I think the conversations that we're having now about whether or not the BBC is a victim of culture wars, if you like, from the right sort of moving in and sort of objecting to what the BBC, kind of how the BBC has behaved in recent years. Whether or not you sort of agree with the rights interference on this. I think it's certainly a lot of scrutiny on what's happening with the BBC board itself. Look, the appointment of the next Director General is for the decision of the BBC board. There's an indirect influence, if you like, from the government from that because of who is on the board. And don't forget, one of the advisors on the board is Sir Robbie Gibb, who is a former Conservative advisor to Theresa May. So I think there's a subtle influence really from government, if you like, in that respect. But we're going to see in the coming days how exactly this plays out. We're just hoping that Samir Shah manages to get that draft of the letter put out within the coming hours so we can bring that to you.
Katie, thank you so much. I hope you got somewhere to go and get a bit dry in between your lives as well. Katie, reporting there for us outside the BBC. And thanks, as always, Mari, for being with us too.
Right, next this morning, parents in England are about to see a new kind of Ofsted report card brought in after changes to school inspections following the death of head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023.
A coroner later ruled that the inspection had contributed to her suicide that sparked national outrage and also calls for a more compassionate approach to school inspections.
Well, under the new system, inspectors will rate schools across key areas instead of giving a single grade. Some, including the Association of School and College Leaders, have criticised the new system for putting even more pressure on teachers. Well, Anjem Pebakos is here for us, our education reporter. Anjem, great to have you on this story. So just sum up how we've got to a place where we've got this new report card to come out and it's still getting quite a lot of criticism from both sides or just from the head teachers?
I think it's mainly from the sector, so school leaders, head teachers and all of those associations that are and unions alongside those. But there is a lot of detail that's now available to parents that previously wasn't in the old system, so there's a lot more categories which parents can look at and get more detail across a broad range of areas within a school. So you're looking at curriculum, you're looking at teaching and learning provision, but also things like inclusion, behaviour policy and safeguarding, and a special category, if there's a sixth form, then that's something also that parents can look into in terms of the detail that they now have available to them in the new system. The issues arise where you've got the National Association of Head Teachers and, like you said, ASCL, the Association of School and College Leaders, where they're saying that because of this new system, the workload and the pressure and the stresses have amplified and intensified. So although they're not averse to measures of accountability, absolutely they should be in place, but it seems as though this new system is going to really intensify those workload and stresses in the sector itself.
So when you're talking about the workload, is it like more kind of paperwork for teachers basically to have to do? Because I know that, you're in a situation now where there's so much for teachers to juggle. They've got 30 kids in the classroom, let alone all the other kind of things. Is that the kind of one of the big concerns?
So just from my own experience, during an Ofsted inspection, the intensity and the pressure and the stress that comes with not just the paperwork, but the accountability that you need to be able to... You could be doing all of those things all day, every day, but the actual evidence that you need to then produce to say that you're doing all of those things all day, every day, it's another layer, if you like, of the bureaucracy that comes with Ofsted. And I know that Sir Martin Oliver has said very categorically that we don't want to increase workload. But the reality is, on the ground, without those kind of bureaucratic measures, how would schools evidence that they're doing all of these things day in, day out anyway?
Anjem, great.
Yeah, really interesting, yeah. We're both thanking you. We're so grateful.
Double thank you. Not everybody gets that. No, I'm joking. Always mutually grateful. Right, we've been reporting this morning on the resignations of BBC Director Tim Davey and the CEO of News, Deborah Turness. Let's talk more about it now with Dame Carolyn Darnier, the chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Were you expecting these resignations and are they warranted?
I wasn't expecting the resignations. I'm very sad. I think it's really regrettable that Tim Davey had to step down. Huge commitment to the BBC and public service broadcasting. But I think he was right to do so. I think restoring trust in the corporation's got to come first. And the fact is that they were very slow to react to the implication of Michael Prescott's report, and they just didn't take it seriously until it was too late.
We were talking to Stuart Purvis earlier, and he was pointing to the fact that, of course, the chair, Mr. Shah, who we're waiting to hear from today, is also across some of these committees and has some form of editorial role as well. If it's warranted that both Tim Davey and Deborah Turness had to go, should Shah be considering his position as well or not?
Well, I think we need someone to be steering the ship at the moment. We're still waiting as a committee to have the response to the letter that we wrote to Samir Shah last week. We're expecting that letter back from him today. And we asked him a whole range of questions to set out what his committee, the Editorial Guidance Committee, are going to do to address some of what seems to be some systemic editorial challenges that the BBC are facing.
Do you think Donald Trump has had undue influence on who runs our public broadcaster in the last week?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's ever healthy for a foreign government to try and interfere in a national media. But equally, you know, he makes a good point. You know, the Panorama documentary was spliced. It wasn't just sort of edited in the normal way. It was spliced to create a very, very different meaning from what had happened. And, you know, and I guess the real thing here is the BBC have always pitched themselves as the antithesis to this very selectively clipped rounds going around on social media and the partisan media you see in the United States. And if we're going to live up to that, we have to make sure that everything the BBC put out is as impartial and as balanced as possible.
Do you think that this and other issues that have bubbled around for the last couple of years will influence and or should influence the BBC Charter discussions that will be taking place over the next couple of years?
I think it has to influence the BBC Charter decisions. If you remember when the Charter was reviewed last time, about 10 years ago, they took the opportunity to put integrity into its top missions and to bring Ofcom in as a regulator. I mean, I think the Charter has to look at how the BBC retains its balance and its integrity, how it retains the trust of the British people and the licence fee payer, because, you know, that's absolutely fundamental for the future of the BBC. But actually it reflects upon us as a nation, because the BBC is such a well-known and such a well-respected brand around the world. The BBC Charter review has to be done in partnership with the licence fee payers who use it, and it has to maintain the trust and respect.
Dame Dunya, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Steinage, thank you very much.
My apologies. And we've got more to come on that topic, of course. Mark Urban coming up later as well.
Yeah, we definitely do. Now, next up, we've got an interview with someone who very rarely does interviews, but she has spoken to the Sunday Times. So this is Gina Ford. Now, if you're a parent, you might have heard of her, and I should say she probably evokes strong opinions on either side of the divide. Some people think that she is the best thing that's ever happened. I can hear in my ear, I should say, the director saying she's a genius. Others will be saying that she is a kind of a monster who's completely unrealistic. She's basically the kind of sleep guru. She wrote a book called The Contented Little Baby Book, which is all about timing naps to, you know, every 5-10 minutes. It's very, very controlled parenting styles, which some people will love, some people will hate. And she's talked to the Sunday Times where she says child-centred parenting is effectively destroying marriages. So in her words, I think that so many parents, because they're trying so hard to bend over backwards to make everything perfect for their children, forget about themselves.
But wait, sorry, is she the person that said you should have a regimented...
Yeah. She thinks you need to be, like, super regimented. Your kid needs to fit in with your,
But then she also
routine.
says child-centred parenting destroys
But I think she basically means child-centred parenting is like giving your kids what they want when they want.
I see.
So, you know, they're not tired. That means you can go to bed half an hour later. No, says Gina Ford. They need to go to bed this minute.
Well, do you know what enforces even more of regiment is a breakfast TV show? Because you're like, you are going to bed right now, because I'm going to bed too.
I'm going to bed. Sorry, guys. Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
And similarly, you know what? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when the little one has his nap, I'm going to do that too. So it's just like he has to match my sleep schedule.
She's got some strong words on iPads as well and on screens, which is quite interesting too. She's basically said, you know, I get people coming to me saying their child won't eat unless they're watching something on the iPad. I say, take it away then. But then they say, no, they'll starve. So she's basically like, tough love, that's what kids need, and they need a strict routine.
I'm going to read this. I haven't read it yet.
Might be too late for you, though.
Well, I think we're pretty regimented. I think
you're quite Gina Ford.
I think she's going to base her next book on how unbelievably anal my wife and I are on regimentation.
Amazing.
Mainly because we need to sleep. But anyway,
it's fair. It's very fair.
Good discussion point. We're going to talk more about the BBC after this short break. As we said, Mark Urban, the storied and incredibly well-respected former BBC journalist of 3 decades, joins us with his take.
She was beautiful, she was bright, she had so much potential.
This wasn't an accident. Those individuals that didn't do their job properly, as far as I'm concerned, Nick, they need to be in a dock.
I don't know why a local authority would be trying so hard to avoid scrutiny.
Is cover-up too strong?
I don't think it is. The evidence is there. Nanita should never have died.
Just got so many questions, and I'm not the only one.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, DC.
Welcome back. A leaked memo revealing comments by US President Donald Trump were misleadingly edited by the BBC, and that, of course, has set off 2 major resignations at the broadcaster.
The Director General, Tim Davies, and News Chief Deborah Turness have both quit amid the fallout, while Donald Trump himself has taken aim, calling the broadcaster dishonest.
Well, the journalist and historian Mark Urban joins us now. You, of course, worked at the BBC for a very long time, 35 years, is that right?
Yes, an inmate for all those years.
Well, congratulations on your escape in that case. Was it the right thing, do you think, for these 2 people to resign?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I think a lot of people around the culture world.
Can I ask you to pause? I'm going to come back to you, but we can just hear from Deborah Turness.
To make one thing very clear, BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider. And if you'd excuse me,
why did you
I would
fail
like
to
just
deal
go
with the
in
mistakes that were made?
and see my teams. Thank you so much for being here.
Do you think that the journalists are corrupt, like President Trump says? Do you think the journalists?
Of course, our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge, but for now, I'm going to go in and see our team.
Do you think the board acted against you?
Thank you so much for being here.
Do you think the board acted against you?
Thank you. We're going in.
Thank you.
Thank you. This way.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, that's...
So you have Lucy Manning, a BBC correspondent, I should say, doorstepping the head of news, Deborah Turness, who, of course, resigned from her job. We were speaking then to Mark Urban, and we can get your direct reaction to that. She said there the BBC News is not institutionally biased. I just wonder, what do you think it is? What's your take?
Well, I think, let's face it, this crisis has come about because the BBC, including Deborah Turness, were not willing to listen to and act sufficiently energetically upon the recommendations of their own internal system for checking bias. Now, we saw that leaked memo with a long list of things. I mean, we've all focused on the Trump interview, but, you know, there was stuff about gender issues, there was stuff about race, there was stuff about Gaza. And I think when you put all those things collectively together, we understand. And if you've been in meetings, as I have for many years, you've seen the BBC change in recent years. I think in common with many other news organisations and many other publicly funded organisations, but you've seen that much more, you know, for want of a better word, woke tendency among younger members of staff, and the tension between young and old. And of course, that's what's burst out here. Now, she resigned on Saturday evening, and I think the interesting question is, well, why did then the Director General have to go? I'm hearing that the board as a whole had expressed confidence in the Director General going forward after her resignation. So why did he need to go? And I think that's a fascinating question. Is it just a horrific job in which the pressures are just too much? He had enough, or...
Yeah, it's interesting to see. It really is. I was really interested to hear what you were just saying then as well about what you kind of witnessed in meetings. And you're right. This happens in all big organisations to an extent, right? Everyone has their own biases. There is kind of groupthink. There is peer pressure. What kind of things in particular were you sort of a witness to?
Well, look, I've written about this in my blog. I mean, you know, you have discussions about gender issues. Someone suggests getting J.K. Rowling on. Well, to be honest with you, you're pretty lucky if you get her on your programme.
Yeah.
But someone then immediately, one of the producers immediately said, no, I don't think we should. She's very problematic. And then someone said, well, how is she problematic? You know, that sort of discussion came up. And, you know, you could often see it's the way that stories are framed and the way that questions are asked, you know, that the onus is always on a certain side of the argument to justify their position.
And do you think it can be difficult, I guess, if you are, like, you know, in a big group of people to be seen as, like, not being kind of right on enough on something like, you know, trans issues or whatever it is, because being judged by people around you?
Yeah, there's a social pressure. And as you guys know, there's just the operational thing. You know, you're out here on air and you're really relying on the producers, on the others who work here, to get you through the programme and to back you up. And if you have a bad atmosphere, you've just had a big argument in a meeting because they consider that you've been, you know, an old white guy or too friendly to Israel on the Gaza, or whatever the question is, then that teamwork is undermined to an extent. So I think in broadcasting, I think there are particular issues where groupthink or the desire to avoid conflict becomes quite a problem in the management of the organisation.
Looking forward, the BBC News new Director General, they've got this whole argument going on about the apology that Samir Shah is expected to give at some point today. We understand there's some kind of conflict about the wording. What do you think the BBC needs to do going forward? I mean, what kind of candidate do you think there needs to be for the next DG?
Well, first off, I'm sorry to see Tim Davey go. I really am. You know, in all my working experiences with him, I think he made a really good and very energetic. You know, he was a proper sort of Tigger in terms of advocating for the organisation and defending it. So I'm sorry he's going. And now, of course, we face this charter renewal process. And a new Director General has to be found. As you say, they have to be someone of pretty exceptional qualities because the allegations of bias from both sides of the political spectrum, the financial pressures, the way the media is changing, the need to invest in digital while keeping those legacy services. It's a massive challenge. But I think what is really critical is not to indulge in sort of evasion of what those critical points were in that Prescott report and in the units that the BBC has internally and usually confidentially raising those concerns. They've got to be more straightforward and make a clean go of it in terms of tackling those questions of bias.
It's been really interesting to talk and to get your perspectives. Thank you so much for being on the programme. Mark Oban there speaking to us.
I've got lots to say on that, but also most of all from the clip we played just at the start of that, which was Lucy Manning, a BBC journalist, quizzing Deborah Turness, the outgoing CEO of News, about whether or not there were questions to answer and whether or not the BBC was institutionally biased. That gives me high hopes that they'll draw a line under this because, just as Mark was just saying, you've got to face up to the issues, you've got to move forward. They're doing that. They're doing that, even if it's awkward, even if it's embarrassing. So I think respect to see that unfold live as we just did.
Coming up, we're going to be discussing the upcoming release of The Death of Bunny Munro. Two absolute icons. Matt Smith, the actor, Nick Cave, who needs no introduction from the likes of me. We'll be talking to them next. Hello, welcome back. Lots of news for you this morning, including the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown telling Sky News Tim Davey and Deborah Turness could have kept their jobs if the BBC had dealt with accusations when they first arose a year ago. They resigned yesterday after claims the BBC had misled viewers by editing a speech from Donald Trump.
Those resignations have been welcomed by the US president, describing the situation as a terrible thing for democracy. In a Truth Social post, Mr. Trump described Tim Davey and Deborah Turness as very dishonest people and accused them of trying to step on the scales of a presidential election.
Schools will now be graded across a range of topics during Ofsted visits after changes were put in place following the death of the head teacher Ruth Perry in 2023. So schools will now receive a more detailed report card assessing the quality of education, behaviour, leadership and personal development.
The US Senate has taken its first big step to ending the longest ever shutdown of the American government. As the shutdown enters day 41, a group of moderate Democrats have agreed to support plans to extend federal funding, which has disrupted air travel across the country, amongst other things.
So our top story this morning, we've had a double resignation at the top of the BBC. Director General Tim Davey and the head of news, Deborah Turness, have both stepped down over an impartiality row. Deborah Turness was doorstepped by the BBC correspondent, no less, as she turned up to work this morning.
Very well. Deborah, have you failed the BBC?
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider.
Why did you fail to deal with the mistakes that were made?
And see my teams. Thank you so much.
Do you think that the journalists are institutionally corrupt, like President Trump says? Do you think the journalists
Of course our journalists aren't corrupt. Our journalists are hard-working people who strive for impartiality, and I will stand by their journalism.
Is there institutional bias at the BBC?
There is no institutional bias. Mistakes are made, but there's no institutional bias.
But why weren't the mistakes dealt with on Trump, on anti-Semitism, on women's rights?
I'm sure that story will emerge, but for now I'm going to go in and see our team.
Do you think the board acted against you? Do you think the board acted against you?
This way, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Deborah Turness being doorstepped there by the BBC correspondent Lucy Manning. It felt like she was half expecting the first question, but then classic Lucy Manning style, if you've ever met her, you know what I mean. She doesn't let go. She keeps asking questions even when it gets awkward, and good on her.
Well, yeah, and respect as well, because it shows that people want to get to the bottom of this. And obviously to solve any problem you have to front up to it, and I think that really shown there that rank and file journalists know that there's something to answer for, whether it's been blown out of proportion or not. Just quickly, I'll observe on this. We were told Davey had resigned yesterday, but agreed to stay in post until a replacement was found. We understand from, including what Mark Urban said, that Deborah Turness resigned on Saturday night. Clearly she's staying in place for a little while as well. It's not like this is you've been frog marched out by security for some act of terrible wrongdoing. And in that regard, I do think it looks like both of them have decided of their own volition to resign, as opposed to necessarily been told, you're out.
I mean, there's an awful lot going on, it's fair to say. So just to give you a bit of a kind of time frame, today we're expecting at some point an apology from Samir Shah, who's the chair of the BBC. It sounds like there's a bit of controversy around that. We haven't heard anything as of yet, but it'll be interesting to see the wording of that apology. And then, of course, they really need to get their skates on to appoint a new Director General, because there are the whole discussions about the charter of the BBC going on.
Which will lead to the next 10 years of funding or otherwise of the BBC. It ends in 2027. But these things don't take, this isn't, you've got a bit of time till the end of 2027, but this is something that, frankly, has been the central part Tim Davey would have been preparing for, to have those negotiations with the government and agree how the BBC will be funded for the next 10 years. So, got to crack on, no doubt about it.
Now, I met one of my heroes recently, which they say you should never do, but actually he was really nice in real life, which was a massive relief. So it was Nick Cave, who is, for me, one of the great creative minds of our generation. Lead singer of the Bad Seeds, he's collaborated with Kylie, Johnny Cash, Shane McGowan. He's also a writer. And one of his books has been made into a new series starring Matt Smith.
Who, of course, you'll know from Doctor Who, and he also played Prince Philip in one of those early seasons of The Crown. And that show was actually made by the same people who made Baby Reindeer. This new show is, not The Crown.
And of course, Baby Reindeer was a huge hit as well that went global. And with this new show that we want to actually just show you a little bit from now, it's called The Death of Bunny Munro. Take a quick look.
Dad, can you teach me how to be a salesman like you?
You've got to set yourself apart. You've got to have something they think they need.
What's that?
Hope. The dream. You've got to sell them the dream.
What's the dream?
Me.
So this is a new Sky show. It looks fantastic. It's a lot of fun, but it tackles some big issues.
Yeah. It's a heavy watch, and I've obviously watched some of it preparing for the interview. It tackles some hugely important themes around grief, about masculinity, about what it is like being a parent. So, not to give too much away, but kind of Bunny's wife and his son's mum dies, and we just see the fallout from that in the most intensely moving way. When I spoke to both of them, Nick Cave and Matt Smith, they were very thoughtful about those topics as well, and also about why it's important to show them on screen. So they started by telling us a bit more about what to expect from the show, and in particular its hero, Bunny Munro.
I just felt the whole thing was in really good hands.
Yeah, agreed.
And as far as Matt went, I thought the interesting thing for me about Matt was that the Bunny Munro I wrote in the book is not a attractive guy. He's not a particularly good-looking guy.
So that's why you chose him, right?
Well, he's not good at what he does. He's actually not good at pulling women. He wants to be this person, but it's just this series of deeply unsuccessful, sort of catastrophic events that happen, and to actually put someone in the role that was actually magnetic, charismatic, sexy, all of these sorts of things, creates a wholly different tension with the thing, because when he's in the book, when he starts to come onto the women are rolling their eyes and batting him away. They're sort of in the TV series, they're sort of lured towards him, and it adds a. It's like, even though everyone knows this guy is a deeply compromised character, still everyone just gets drawn into the sort of whirlpool of this character's charm.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really interesting, terrifying idea, and I think, Matt, you did that amazingly.
Yeah, and actually from a kind of female viewer point of view as well, like the fact that it's not all about, the kind of objectification of the women.
We need to recognise how extraordinary the women are in this, all the different women. They're just, the way they, I think they're, for me, one of the great things about the whole thing is just the way the women are portrayed.
Yeah.
Can I ask about toxic masculinity? Because in a way I hate the phrase, right, in some ways, because it kind of has this implication that masculinity is somehow toxic, which is not. It's something to be kind of celebrated and all that. But it is an interesting exploration of masculinity in the show. I don't know if there's anything that you would sort of say on that. What do you think?
Well, it is. I mean, it's the show is about the sins of the father in a way, and breaking the cycle of whatever that journey that is inherited through your parents is. But it can be the sins of the mother as well. But in this, when you meet Bunny's father, there's a whole. I think the lens on him and the story shifts slightly, but it was never. It's not. I don't think it's, we were never trying to make a TV show that made a statement on that.
I know that men relate to that character.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that on some level men just get him, right? But I also hope that women can relate to this individual that's just trapped in a kind of vortex of grief and suffering. This can be anybody in a way. It's not just it's not just a guy. And maybe that works and maybe it doesn't. I can't tell because I am just a guy. But, I hope that it says just something about suffering humanity rather than just transgressive humanity.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
I wanted to say how much sense it does make. And I think that actually we are so bad at talking about grief and the imperfect reaction we all have to it. And from your perspective, writing books like this, writing albums like Ghost Teen, I do think it's almost like a public service in a way, because it gets us to talk about some of these issues that we're so bad at speaking about, right?
Yeah. But I don't. There is the grief aspect, but there's also what it is like to raise a child,
Yeah.
right? And we look at families and we hope the families are happy, but the truth of it is, and I know when I was raising my first kid, who's now 33 or something, it'll kill me if I've got that wrong, but that I had this life that I was trying to navigate at the same time that was full of darkness, really, and all sorts of things that I was just trying to, that was very self-interested as well. And I had a kid, and there was just this, and I was really good at making the kid feel like I was just a great dad. But there was also this vortex going on, you hope beyond what he sees, but of course it never really is. And I don't think that that's a story that is unfamiliar to any parent on some level.
It definitely speaks to me.
But also with Bunny, what I noticed, and what's sort of beautiful about him in a way is there's a profound sadness in him, and like if like the train of momentum that is Bunny Munro stopped, and he is ever left on his own, he's just left with this black hole, which is why he does all this other mad stuff. But he's also, I know people are going to label this or label that, but do you not think he's really interesting?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? He's an interesting man. When you sit down
in front of the TV, what you want to see is something where people are interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
And memorable.
Yeah.
And do memorable things.
And you can watch more of Sophie's interview, by the way, on the Ridge and Frost YouTube channel. Awesome stuff. And it's such amazing themes in it. And of course, this is based on a novel that Cave wrote, right?
Yeah.
But he's experienced a lot of this himself. I don't know if it was a semi-autobiographical novel, but he's very well qualified to talk about a lot of these issues.
I think Nick Cave understands grief and what grief means. He obviously lost his son. He wrote this incredible album, Ghost Teen, about grief, about dealing with death, and I think that he brings something to that with the way that he has written this book, and it's been made into this absolutely incredible series, I should say, about the imperfect ways we all deal with grief. And I think it is something that, as a society, we are not very good at talking about or facing up to, but it is something that will come to all of us at some point in our lives, and something that many people, many of you as well, I'm sure, will be grappling with as well.
And the series Death of Bunny Munro comes out 20th of November on Sky and Now, and you can watch more of Sophie's interview online already.
We should bring you some stats now on driving. This is some research that's been done on the most dangerous spots for uninsured drivers. New figures show that someone in the UK is struck by an uninsured or a hit-and-run driver every 20 minutes.
Wow. According to the data from the Motor Insurers Bureau, Thurrock in Essex is the worst offending area, and 4 of the top 15 are in the broader Birmingham area.
So you've got there some new stats coming out from the Motor Insurers Bureau. They've been doing an awful lot of work on this, and I think it really does show, I guess, the impact that some of this stuff is happening. Every 20 minutes feels like an awfully long time, doesn't it?
It really does. It's sort of striking how there can even be enough people uninsured on the roads for that to be possible. More on that to come. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to have more of the highlights of the weekend sport. Don't go away.
Eastern Libya is the new doorway to Europe for people being smuggled from Africa and Asia.
We are close to Greece. You can see it.
We've obtained unprecedented access to the authorities.
Do you feel you're just scratching the surface?
We've been on the raids, out with the Coast Guard.
Absolutely desperate.
And inside the detention centres.
How did you cope with that?
To find what's pushing people to Europe and what's driving the authorities here to stop them.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Flying minutes, fly better. Thank you.
Hello again, we've got Jackie here, which means we're talking all things sport. We're also talking football, because it felt to me like this was the weekend where everything changed with the Premier League.
Yeah, well, it kind of did, because Manchester City, and I honestly did not mean to wear this jacket this morning, I just kind of got dressed in the dark. Totally accidental. Manchester City swatted away Liverpool.
Lovely, by the way.
You're wearing it too. Swatted away Liverpool as if they were a little fly. And of course they're not. You know, they were great against Real Madrid. And Man City turn up, 1,000th game for Pep Guardiola. What an amazing present. 3 goals, could have been 4 because Erling Haaland had a penalty save right at the beginning. Then he got a goal. And then we had Jeremy Doku, who had the most amazing game and scored a fantastic goal as well. I mean, Pep was smiling from ear to ear at the end, and you can just imagine why. 5 defeats and 6 in the Premier League for Liverpool. It's if it wasn't a crisis, it sort of is a mini crisis. It really is. And if you've got someone like Isak, you spent fortunes on, sitting on the bench, still not fit to come on, you've got a few problems there.
Just to say, Arsenal still are top of the league. It's
How
not
are you
all
feeling?
change yet.
He's an Arsenal fan.
How did Sheffield Wednesday do
an
this
Arsenal
weekend?
fan.
We lost again, but you know that's but you can't. Wilf, you can't. It's a.
I'm not criticising. I'm asking.
It's a different position.
Different ball game, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
I genuinely didn't know. I should have looked that up. Let's move. Can we move on to the tennis?
Well, just briefly about Arsenal. 2-2 Sunderland. Sunderland did what no one has done. No one has done all season.
Basically, the team wanted to show us conceding
2 goals. Well, you've got to suffer, and I've got to suffer a little bit as well. But I think it was sort of a message to Arsenal: we're not infallible. Yes, we've got this amazing defence, but they figured it out and they messed them up, and that's what.
Do they still do that Sunderland TV series? That was cracking. Is it still going? Because it'd be.
I don't think it's still going. It's great. Oh, it is. Apparently, it is still going. I watched the first. First few seasons.
It'd be good this season.
After that,
comeback.
Right, Granite Xhaka, I messed up my old team on my own, and it was a fantastic result for them. And we want to talk a little bit, because we mentioned Formula 1 before, but to talk about tennis. So the PGA finals happened, finished at the weekend, and this is the best of the best, top 8 players at the end of the season, the jewel in the crown, and it's in Saudi Arabia now. And this has been a little bit of a bone of contention when it was awarded there. You know, you had the likes of Martina Navratilova coming out and saying, look, we didn't fight for equal pay for years and years and years in tennis, for you to gift the jewel in the crown to a country where, you know, rights between men and women are not equal. Anyway, it's happened. Money talks. Saudi have invested £1 billion in tennis over the next few years in Saudi, including this event. But it's a tough sell. It's a really tough sell.
I'm really interested in this because of the political reasons, right? Because, look, you know, they're investing in women's sport, in women's tennis, but what is the situation for women in Saudi Arabia?
They can now go into a stadium to watch sport. So that's quite a recent thing. So, something like 2018, they were allowed to physically go to a stadium and watch an event like this. They've been taking part in private schools since about 2012, but in the public schools, it's still quite recent. 2017, girls were allowed to play sports. This is Elena Rybakina beating the world #1 Sabalenka to the title, but not that many people, I don't think, at the start of this tournament wanted to go and see it. There were a lot of empty seats. It is a tough sell.
And you can't imagine, I'll be honest, a woman in Saudi Arabia be able to play tennis in that outfit, looking like that.
Yeah, they're allowed.
Around the court.
They're allowed, but the locals maybe
what
not.
Was the price
more
money?
Difficult. So she walked away with $5.25 million.
There you go. I've got to leave it there.
We are out of time, Jackie. Thank you so much. Much more on that BBC story. We're awaiting a statement by the chair. Gareth is up next.